Well, he can bring a few.
He should.
He can have a signing.
Good morning. Welcome to the implementation, 8th of December 2021. I welcome you here on behalf of my co-chair, Councillor Brian Scott. I welcome, here we are on my right, our chair, CEO, Sarah Gardner. We have directors in the room, Nick Donnelly, and our GM, Dr. Gavin Palmer, and the transportation team waiting eagerly around the corner. Let's go through this. Apologies. We have no apologies. We have Councillor Michael Deaker on Zoom. Welcome, Councillor Deaker. We've got no request for a public forum. Now, the confirmation of agenda has changed. It has been decided that the rabbit control assets paper, originally to be in non-public, will now be to consider with members of the public. It should now be considered in public. So it was public excluded. It's going to be into public. I need to move this paper from the public excluded agenda to the public agenda. Thank you, Councillor Laws. Thank you, Councillor Calvert. This has been a stating of a staff recommendation for the change. Confirmation of minutes.
Excuse me, can we
yes.
vote on that then?
You want to vote? I apologise. I apologise. Let's vote. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. My apologies for that. 5, we're going to have confirmation of the minutes. We've got the minutes of 8th of September for implementation committee and 5.2, which is minutes of the 8th of December non-public implementation. May I please have a mover and a seconder for those?
So moved.
Councillor Laws, thank you. Councillor Robertson, seconded. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. Now, action 6. We've got outstanding actions from resolution of the committee. This is on page 9. Actions from resolutions of previous implementation committee meetings to be reviewed by staff. Have we any, please? Councillor Malcolm?
We've got completed from a notice of motion that we did on the 8th of September.
Yes.
A progress report on gravel extraction consents in our regular quarterly reports to implementation committee, and we don't appear to have that to this committee.
That's through Dr. Palmer, I'm taking it. Dr. Palmer, would you like to comment on that, please? The council?
Yes, Madam Chair, we are finalising the content of what will be a regular quarterly report to committee on those 3 matters and other river management flood protection matters. In the meantime, though, as noted in the register, there was a brief update on those 3 matters in the corporate activity report 2 weeks ago.
Which on that report said they were in progress. On that was at the finance committee in the quarterly report, which said it was in progress. So we've got no even a verbal update as to where they're at.
No.
Does that keep?
So, Dr. Palmer, will that
keep rolling on?
Yes. Will you?
The next one is being overdue next time.
I imagine so.
It's just it's got there as completed.
Yes.
Which therefore the action is. I don't believe that is complete.
So it's a slight error.
Yes, Madam Chair, it should be shown as in progress.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Would that be similar for the one on the river management on the 3rd line as well?
Dr. Palmer, please.
It says completed at the moment, but same action. I think it's still the intent. I think from the motion was it would be ongoing.
Yes, that's correct. And as I've said, rows 1, 3, and 4 will be subject to regular quarterly reporting. There's an error in the table. It should be in progress.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that,
So,
Councillor
Chair,
Malcolm.
just with your the issue I probably do have with that, if we wait to the next quarter, we're then 6 months out from being able to give our constituents a progress on that happening. So once this draft is done, will we? Once the format's finished, will we get a copy of that out to us, or will we be waiting to the next quarter?
Dr. Palmer, is it possible, please, just for an update?
Yes, I'm happy to send the report out ahead of the next scheduled implementation committee.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
And that's great. The thing is, we're live today, and I think people are expecting that and are interested in this area. And will that be a public report or comment about it? Because that, I think, is what's been expected. I mean, some of this stuff has been highlighted in reports from council since 2000 and 15 or 16 is actions we're going to be doing. So, yeah, there is, yeah.
I can't see why not.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I apologise. Dr. Palmer, I cannot see any reason why not. There's detail.
The intention was that the reports be posted on the website, but we'll think about other ways of expediting that, which could include a meeting of the implementation committee in February, for example, at the February round, whereby we would report there.
That would be wonderful. You satisfied, Councillor Calvert?
Well, that's February. It's February. Yep. Yeah, we've just got a lot of outstanding issues on, and I'll talk of my patch on the Cowra River. We've got issues down on the Shag River that are all around gravel extraction that people are trying to get. They're happy if we're progressing, but they just want to know. So that's really good, Dr. Palmer, if we'll have that by February. I'll let them know that that's underway.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson and Councillor Malcolm, and I appreciate that, Dr. Palmer. Excuse me, I seem to be frog in my throat this morning. I'm unsure why. We've satisfied now.
The water must be healthy.
That's right. We've finished now on the outstanding actions. We will move, if we may, to 7.1, which is the environmental implementation update. And I invite Dr. Palmer and Ms. Howard to come forward, please. While they're coming forward, I'll just read this. This report is a quarterly summary of operational implementation activities undertaken in freshwater, biosecurity and biodiversity. It includes details about projects currently underway, as well as improvements being made to existing processes and systems that support delivery of the activities. Ms. Howard and Dr. Palmer, this is, as usual, a great and lengthy report. And as the chair, I'm going to ask you the following, and I ask my fellow councillors to bear with me. I wonder, because it's such a great report, we do a few things. Can we split it first, that we perhaps talk about the report itself? I wondered, could we just go piece by piece, if that's all right? I mean, we've got from pages 12 to, to 39 here, or 10 to 40, if you like. This is a noting report, obviously. There's three lots of notes for recommendation, but this takes in quite a lot of detail. And I just wonder if that would be all right with you two, if we just went through it and we just did it in sections, which would then you can talk about, and then we can have some questioning from our councillors here. Are you satisfied that that might work all right? Or how would you like to do it? I don't want to take away from the good work you've done, but I also want my councillors here to feel free that they can question anything, because it is so lengthy.
We're happy to take the report as read, but
you.
We're also happy for you to go through it section by section to ask us questions.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer. All righty, we will get it underway. I think is it Councillor Wilson with your hand up?
Just whenever you've got to page 14 of the agenda.
Let's go to page 14 on the agenda, please.
So, thank you. It's really exciting to see the establishment of the environmental implementation team and the positions that have been filled. At what point and how are we going to ensure that names are put beside that the public can see that? Because I think it's really important for them to see that and for us to understand that structure and whose roles they are. I appreciate that some of it may not be stuff that is public, but some of those are very, very public facing positions that the community, I think it's really good, important that we are seen to be filling those positions and people can see who those people are doing those jobs.
Great. Through the chair, I'm not sure it's standard ORC practice to do that, but we're out there engaging with communities, and we can put together something to send out to our stakeholders with contact points, if that's appropriate.
Right. Are we talking about paragraph 15?
Yes.
Yeah. No, well, there's a reason why, Andrea, and it's because we'd quite like to know who they are, so we engage with them, basically. And if we don't know who they are, then how do we engage with them?
Through the chair, you engage through Sarah, I guess, and Gavin, and my team engage with Gavin.
Yeah, no, I think we're looking for something a little bit more direct than that. So what we're trying to do is just say, if we know who those people are and they're working on any areas, then that's nice to know that we've got that reference when constituents come to us and
Mrs. Gardner, are you wanting to say something?
Yes, I can.
Certainly.
So there is a protocol, as you know, which is that councillors work through me and general managers. So even though we have staff working in the community, I would not expect that you would be going directly to those staff with requests.
Not going for requests.
Well, I'm sorry, that's what I was interpreting.
No,
from
no,
what
no.
you were
I'll give you an
saying.
example. Can I give you an example?
You can absolutely give me an example.
A constituent comes to you and says, I've got an issue that you know could be effectively dealt by that way. You just say, oh, so-and-so's working out of our Cromwell office, get in contact with them, and they'll be able to help you.
Oftentimes it's better to come through the general manager because things change. Someone could be on leave, they could be doing a special project, anything. So actually, in terms of customer satisfaction, it's better to come through me or the general manager. Then we make sure that they can access somebody who is available.
Councillor Malcolm.
Yeah, probably just a comment, and that's probably what I've said a couple of years ago when I first started. It would be really neat to have a set process for requests for services, and I absolutely agree with the way you're doing it. So then, if a constituent has an issue, they go through a set channel, and then certainly the managers of each area can actually track the performance of that. So that would be really good. But I think I would just like to know who actually is operating in my area. Simply when David Douglas says that Wallaby fella's up here doing a really good job. Well, I actually know it's Simon, but it would be really good to know, or someone's come and helped me from the Omri office doing a resource consent. What was that name? Can you remember that name, Kevin? Or if I don't know that name, which I do know the name, but I mean, if I don't know the name, and that's it's not about getting into operational stuff. It's about actually just the knowledge of those people. So when people refer you to the Wallaby fellas doing a good job, that's Simon.
Councillor Wilson, thank you.
So look, I understand the process we have to go through, Sarah, and general managers. I don't have a problem with that. What I do find embarrassing is going out into the field and meeting staff that I have absolutely no idea who they are and what their names are, let alone their positions. And for us not understanding that framework, I'm not going to remember these names, but I will remember if there's a name beside them, what they do. And I just think it's about respect. It's embarrassing if you can't introduce someone at a meeting as this is XYZ. They do, and that I find really difficult. So I do think that it's stuff that should be public. These people should be their names. I mean, I don't even care if it's not their contact details, but just putting a name beside those positions so we understand that, I think is absolutely appropriate and fair that the community understand that those roles have been filled and who by.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I've got Councillor Calvert and then Councillor Scott. Councillor Calvert.
I imagine that it might be useful for us, acknowledging what Mrs. Gardner's saying about it's useful to have things through general managers. I imagine what might be useful is if a constituent rings the council and asks for a query, that query wouldn't always go to a general manager. So whoever that query would usually go to, if somebody rang the council, that's the person whose name we want to suggest that they go and ask for. So, and I'm presuming it isn't a general manager for the most part, that people, when they ring and say, I've got a query about X, Y, and Z. Yeah, so I'm just saying it's the person who would be referred to when somebody just rings randomly the regional council. Who would they usually be sent to? The name of that person would be useful for us if they would usually be sent to them, because that's not something that we wouldn't do, that as a stranger could just ring and ask. Would that usually be a general manager, Mrs. Gardner?
No, it wouldn't normally be a general manager, but what our customer experience staff would know is exactly who's working on that day and who can be contacted. So that's the difference, I guess, between that go-between situation where you referred to someone directly and then they found they couldn't get hold of the person, or it was a different person, or whatever the case may be. There are times when staff are publicised publicly, if you like. For example, you know, I'm not sure what Andrew's plans are with things like water lines and on stream or in stream. I always get it wrong. But usually that's where you will find those catchment advisors reporting on what they've been doing in their areas. So there is public information about who those people are. And that's, you know, that's sort of the way that we use those publications to assist in that regard. But in terms of direct inquiries, definitely our customer experience staff will know who to put things through to or what to do if somebody is on leave or otherwise. And of course, the other option is that you refer the inquiry through Gavin or myself, and we can make sure that it gets through the right person. So it's not a case of not wanting to say who the people are, but it is a case of making sure we follow the right channels and get the best customer service for people when they want to make contact. And I'm just saying that you can't always rely on, you know, the person that you last knew was in the spot is necessarily going to be available. And so we do manage that through our customer service staff so that we make sure people can get response.
Thank you, Mrs. Garner. I have Councillor Scott, and I have Councillor Forbes, and then Councillor Callagher, please.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, just some clarification about what a catchment advisor actually does.
That's what I was going to ask too.
Through the chair. So I'm not sure if I can recite the job description right now, but very similar. Well, so what a catchment advisor does is go out and work. So each of our catchment advisors and our biosecurity officers have been assigned a geographic area in which they work. So that means instead of just one person, we've got two people who understand the local context and the knowledge of that catchment area. So they will continue, as they have done in the past, to work with individuals and community groups, so individual landowners in terms of best practice, community groups, in essence, identifying an environmental problem or opportunity and working with them to hopefully realise that. So that's through things like advice, education, capability building, through directing them to various funding opportunities, through connecting them with other people who might be experiencing similar issues. But really it's about the identification of a problem and supporting them to solve that or to make steps to address whatever issue or opportunity there is. So we would expect, and there'll be a little bit of on the ground project implementation. So if you take the lake, the Tomahawk Lagoon project, the local catchment advisor would provide the day-to-day interaction around that project. And we've got some specific project roles in the environmental implementation team, which would manage the overall delivery of that project.
So through the chair, is it a reactive role where if there's a landowner with a problem, they ring up and they get referred to the catchment advisor, or is it a proactive role, like with certain expectations? For example, it might be to meet with each landowner in the catchment, or maybe that's not practical from the numbers perspective, or, you know, are there sort of proactive strategies to achieve certain outcomes, like for water quality, and also at the same time, how do they connect with, for example, the Otago catchments community?
Through the chair, so both. We need to be proactive and we need to be able to be responsive. So I can bring back the catchment plan and overarching in the next for the next report, so I can talk a bit more about it. We're just still finalising the paperwork for the last role. So so they will do all of those things. In the future, we'll have a target of each catchment advisor visiting X amount of landowners in the area per year, but 100% we need to be responsive to what people want from us as well. So it'll be a mixture of both. And our role in terms of those catchment advisors is the connection between the various land users and interests within the community focused on those environmental outcomes.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. And just before I go to Councillor Forbes here, am I correct, Ms Howard, that this now replaces a rural liaison officer? It's wrong?
Uh, Well, the rural liaison
Tweak-
function no
yes,
longer exists.
absolutely.
There's a similarity,
Yes.
but we're
Yes.
interested in environmental issues in both urban and rural areas.
Yes, that's the difference, isn't it? Now we've
Um,
got that mandate because we're going into that urban area.
Yes, it's
Very much
quite.
so.
However, the catchment advisors, for example, will have a basic understanding of biosecurity, so that when they're talking to people, they can also pass on biosecurity and biodiversity measures. Where the environmental implementation team will work more holistically across freshwater biosecurity and biodiversity, which makes it slightly more difficult around defined responsibilities. Each of the job descriptions have those, but we also want people to be able to talk about a range of things when they're engaging with landowners. So
Thank you. I've got Councillor Forbes, Councillor Gallagher, and then I've got Councillor Laws, and then Councillor Malcolm.
I've got two things, but
Certainly.
the first one is I'd like to go back, the conversation's moved on a bit, to our protocols Michael was talking about. And I
Sure.
wonder if we might actually have a discussion about this in a governance and communications meeting, so that we can
agree.
establish some protocols around how we manage our staff that are, how we
Yes.
approach them or
Yes.
not. I mean, we're seeing from our survey, and I'm certainly seeing from lots of other things, that our customer service isn't what people expect it to be.
Yes.
So we need to up that game, but it would be really, really good for us to
Move
have.
a motion. I'll support you.
Would you like to move a motion,
Because
Councillor
that's the only
Forbes?
way that you'll make sure that.
Well, how am I going to instruct staff on this? So I think it would be something along the lines that we bring to the governance and communication meeting,
Yes.
and it's the
Okay.
first one of the new year, perhaps, that we advise on a protocol around how we approach staff,
Governance staff.
a
relations.
governance staff relationship.
Yeah, sure.
All right, I have a seconder.
Sarah, how do you think that could go?
Sorry,
No, sorry.
I'm not sure because we
Sorry,
already
no,
have one.
Sarah wasn't here.
We don't really have one, do we? Where do we have that? I was looking for it and didn't find anything clear on that at all. It's for, in terms of approaching, what are you thinking, Bridget? In terms of approaching staff out in the field
Yeah,
and recommending things on, I don't think that we have anything that's really clear on that.
well, I'm happy to draft the protocol and, but I mean, we've talked about it.
We have talked about it, but I think we need a protocol that's
Okay.
written.
Yes, certainly, I'm happy to draft a protocol.
So Councillor Laws, you're happy to
I'll second
second
that.
that?
So how's it looking? I'm sorry, Liz, I
Okay.
haven't given you.
So
that
it goes to the
clarity.
next governance, governance, communications and engagement committee.
In
Yeah.
2022?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, is there any discussion on that?
A question for the
Councillor-
CEO. So,
May I read
Liz
this
has
back,
got it.
please?
Do you want to put it up,
Um,
Liz?
Requests that staff bring to the next governance comms and engagement meeting, advice on protocols around how we approach governance staff relationships.
Yeah, I think that's probably it.
that doesn't get
No,
it.
it doesn't.
No, no, no,
Engage.
no.
Customers, isn't it?
Can I explain as the person who's going to second? I think that what this does is it starts the conversation.
Thank
And it's a
you.
conversation that we all need to be involved in, both senior executive and governance. And so what that does is put it on the agenda for that conversation to happen. That's all it does. And that
That's all
conversation
I
will
want to
occur.
happen. I want us
Exactly.
to start
Yeah.
thinking about that, so that we don't have confusions and we don't have people approaching things in
quick
the wrong
Councillor
way.
Malcolm?
I thought the previous discussion that we're having is about how, when we are approached by a constituent, how we
Well, that
refer
would be
That's
that,
part of
right.
that.
how
that's
that
to
we
be part of
refer
that.
that
Yeah.
constituent to.
Let's
a
put that on there
staff
too,
member.
shall we,
But
Councillor
that will be
Malcolm?
part of that.
Yeah.
That's part of,
Well,
that's
that's
the
not very
protocols
clear
of
in that.
engagement.
Okay.
I
entirely.
don't think that's got anything to do with that.
Just,
It doesn't come out. of
sorry,
that.
if I could just be really clear.
Okay, just a minute, we'll have Mrs. Gardner and then we'll go back to.
No, I'm not worried about the motion so much, but I just want to be clear that the decision about the protocol sits in any case, regardless of who's in the CE seat with the CE.
Exactly.
So I'm just being really clear about that. So it wouldn't be a decision-making paper, it would be a noting paper.
Can I
Exactly. I
hesitate to
agree
say
with
do
that.
this, but I disagree with you.
Well,
Wait on, no, excuse me. The governance team is responsible for creating policy. It's the CE's job to enact it utilising the staff. If the governance team say the policy around the protocol is X, then really that's the end of it.
Well, perhaps you'd like to read your code of conduct, because it's very clear that if I set a protocol and you don't follow it, it's a breach of code of conduct. So
Well,
to my
no,
mind,
but we've already
it
know
is
the code
clear.
of conduct's inadequate.
Well,
That's okay, but I'm happy. That is what I am actually wanting to move, is that we have
Yeah.
a really clear understanding from Sarah about how she wants us to manage those relationships when they come up. Which is, and a constituent asking us for access to somebody or something is exactly a situation of that coming up.
Is it engagement you want in the relationship?
Sorry, before I go, Councillor Robinson, I've got you, but I'm just looking at Councillor Malcolm because you've obviously got queries. Do you want to think about what it is you want that to say? And then I can go to, is that, I'll go Councillor Robinson.
Engagement's a better word, Liz.
Okay, you've got that, Liz?
Yeah, I'm
Yep.
a little bit confused with where
You
we're
want to
at
change them?
on this, given the discussion previously was around advertising staff names for the community to be able to interact with them.
Well, yes.
And then we've got to a protocol on governance staff, its engagement, but it was relationship. Is quite different from the discussion we've just had, which was how would the community know who their local person is that they're supposed to engage with? Quite a different question. I'm not sure where this one's actually coming from, although it's useful. And if we are talking about this one, governance staff engagement, then yeah, there's a lot of employment law that we've talked about in the past that actually comes into play. It's quite a broad topic there of what legally our responsibilities are. And how we approach this is important. It's a huge topic. I'm not sure we captured it just before with why we're doing it and how to do it, and who should be doing it.
There's a specific problem or two to solve here.
Yes, there is, Alex.
And that's what I'm trying to get to. And so it may be staff, public governance staff. But it seems like there needs to be some protocols because things go wrong.
Yeah.
I can understand, Councillor Forbes, I understand that you're trying to help. And so I'm more than happy to bring a protocol back. I guess my main concern was that it was clear that it wasn't for decision. Because
So do we need to write that into
No, you
such a
don't,
motion?
because
No.
I disagree with the Chief Executive in a big way on that issue. And so let's not have that debate now. This is really an issue about trying to manage a relationship. And how do we manage this relationship? Can I give an example though, Sarah? It would be bizarre if I, as the elected Dunstan Ward councillor, for example, didn't know who the catchment advisors were for my own ward and be able to direct constituents to them who might have a particular query. And yet, if I was an ordinary constituent who just happened to reside in Cromwell, I'd be able to go to those people straight away and know who they were.
I don't believe that's bizarre at all.
Yeah, it
Excuse me,
is.
but okay, we're really into debate on that here, but I don't believe that's bizarre.
it depends on the level of customer service that you're looking for.
We're just trying to direct our constituents to the right place.
And the 0800 number should do that.
Yes.
It should do that. I should be able to stand in front of someone and say, hang on, I'm just going to ring someone and see.
Why
if
can't they
can
just
talk."
go and have a chat to them?
Well,
the
she
contact?
can't.
So as the
It's bizarre.
as the wood chopper for ORC, this week I'm actually chopping wood up the Lindis, and I'm actually not available to go and look at your wood, but Andrew Noon, who's also a wood chopper in Alexandra, has actually got plenty of time and come and look at your problem immediately. I'm actually out of reception, but if you ring the 0800 number, go through the right channels, Andrew will be tootling up there
the right
in his
place.
hopefully what's the name?
Actually sharp.
And it could be an almost
Transport.
electric. What are they called? Car. Car come and get the job done. So that's what we can't.
Yes.
As a elected representative, we can't determine the workload of any one person, and that's the part. Well, you actually are. By referring someone direct to someone, you're then anticipating that. Yeah. So I mean, we still need to know the people, but I believe we need to make sure we've got a pretty succinct protocol of where we
I
refer
think it'd be
them to.
quite good to have one.
Councillor Calvert, can you just bear with me because it actually, excuse me, it's Councillor Kelleher, and then I had Councillor Wilson, and then you, Councillor Calvert. I'm not ignoring you. Councillor Kelleher.
Two very confusing analogies from Mr. Waitaki so far today. For me, this has come about because in here we have stated some roles, and then we've asked who are the names beside it. And so for me, what we're saying, what it's saying is, no, you're not going to know who those names are. But for us out in the rural sector especially, we are in field days, we are approached by staff, and if we can't even have an awareness of who the names are and where these roles sit, it just further divides us as governance from staff and the operations. And then it's totally up to us to decide what is delving into operational, what is governance. We will choose that because we're all professional governors. But for the refusal to even know those names and who those roles are and that they're established and who those people are, so that when we see them in a function or we see them out on a field day, to me is just absolutely bizarre. So I would really welcome the protocol, because then we'll have a chance to debate it and discuss it, and it'll be really clear to us, and then we can decide how we manage it.
Thank you, Councillor Kelleher. Now, we're on this still. We've still got that. We've got you, Councillor Wilson.
I think there's, and I agree with you, although I think the discussion is that we're not going to get to discuss the protocol, unfortunately. There is a much higher level here. We have just put people's rates up substantially in order to employ new people. I think it is really, really on us to be very clear about those appointments being made, that they are being made, that they're real people, that they are not just movements within council and savings being made in council. And if there are, that would be really good that we knew that council staff had changed roles. That would be good, because, you know, again, saw one recently who was no longer doing one job, was doing something else. It's really good if we can have that understanding. It doesn't mean that we need to, and I agree, we shouldn't necessarily be going to them directly unless we're talking to them in literally at a meeting. It's helpful to know that this person is now doing this job. If you're in a meeting with them, and that's going to answer the issue that the constituent has. I think if we cannot put these names on a simple report like this, and a structure of what these positions are and what gaps are still to be filled, then we are undermining the trust that we are trying to build with the ratepayers who are paying for these positions. And that is really clear to me, that and we should be building relationships with. If someone called a partnership lead can't have their name in here and going to start ringing round people saying, I'm the new partnership lead for biodiversity, that's it's something wrong. That others, it just doesn't look good.
But these aren't our core, are they?
Well, I'm not saying that we call them. It's about the building relationships and trust that these positions have been filled, and that they're real people that haven't just been taken up from another role in council.
Right, before I go to Councillor Kelleher, Mrs. Gardner's asked to respond. So Mrs. Gardner, then we'll go, and then we'll try and get this done and dusted, because we need to move on with this report, okay? Mrs. Gardner, please.
Yes, all right. I think you are conflating two different things. One is the protocol that we will formalise for you, and I have no problem with doing that. That is my responsibility, and in fact, I think you can find in the Local Government Act where it talks about councillors have one employee, that is me. I have the rest of the employees. Okay, so you cannot direct staff. That is the way it works. So that's the protocol piece, right? That's the first piece. The other piece that you're talking about, which is you want to know who the people are. I believe I said before that we publicise who the people are in things like on stream, etc. So I don't see that as an issue. I'm just saying the relationship you have with those staff comes through the protocol. So it's two different things.
Okay. I don't want to labour this, because I think the appropriate time is passing this motion, getting to that, and then we'll have that debate around then. So I second it, and I move the motion be put.
Yes, but before we do that, please, Councillor Calvert has had her hand up, and I think it's only fair and just and right you go. Way go, Councillor Calvert, please. Then we'll move.
I think I think there is some conflation going on, and I can see where Mrs. Gardner's coming from. If it's it's properly a paper for noting at our meeting, that doesn't determine what we do with it. It just says that the report comes to us saying we will note it. So it's
What happens after
where we
that?
go from there, who knows?
Correct. Yeah.
I just, on a personal level, I personally don't need names for some of these people because I'm not sure who, for example, I wouldn't know whether to refer somebody to the project delivery specialist biosecurity programs in our environmental implementation team. I'd have no idea whether it was appropriate to send somebody along there anyway. So because of the roles being in my head, I can't figure out what they would be doing anyway, particularly. I'm not saying that they're wrongly described. I'm just saying that, so it wouldn't help me to know who was in that role because I wouldn't be quite sure what that role was doing. But I think it needs, we can talk about it when we come back there.
Okay, now let's, Ms. Spector, would you mind putting that up above again for me, please? I think, please, could we just get on with this? Can we vote on it? And then can we get back? There's a lot of questions I think we should be asking Ms. Howard. Let's have this discussion. I think it needs to go to the comms, all right? And let's move on. The meter's ticking. Right, we've got here, bring to the next GEC meeting advice on protocols around how much we approach governance staff engagement. Anything else we want to add to that before I take a vote?
Isn't it asking Mrs. Gardner to bring that advice?
So do you want to put the CE? CE to,
just sort of
so is that all right, Mrs.
It's a
Gardner?
doing word, there should be
Yes,
somebody
requests.
doing the doing.
Thank you. All right, you happy, everybody?
To bring. That would be.
To bring, press it to bring.
Yeah.
Please, Liz. Okay, and we have a mover and a seconder. Now, let's go. Okay, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Well done. Let's move on, please.
I must
Miss,
clarify though,
yes,
we are going to have names now. Andrea, is that right? Sorry, because I'm pretty sure Sarah said that's fine. Because if the names were going into water lines, then,
You can read them in water.
You can read them on water lines, exactly.
oh, that's just.
Yeah, no.
Deal. Okay, move on.
can we just move on? Thank you. Now, Ms. Howard, I do see, and I think we need to crack on with this. You've got an executive summary. We see we're leading some work here for Jobs for Nature. There's 4 of them. We're strengthening our relationships. This is on page 10 and 11. There's a lot of work going on. We've been working with the universities on wallabies, wilding fines, russet lupins, and marine pests. We've got an MOU. There is a lot going, and I would like it, please, then we go down to Lake Hayes, Tomahawk, and Te Katoto. Could we just talk about that, please? I think we can just move on. Councillor Scott, I can see you there. Would you like to talk to Ms. Howard, Councillor Scott?
Oh, yeah, well, can I ask a question in that regard?
Sure.
Not sure what page it's on, but figure 1, where you've identified a snapshot of the environmental
Page 13.
initiatives for Otago. So that's excellent, and that's something we've been talking about for a while, to actually figure out and understand what's actually going on from a regional perspective, and ideally to get various groups, whether it's HALO or whether it's ORC or whoever it is, OCC, ideally to work together. Yeah, so now that we are pictorializing the different things going on around the region in terms of environmental initiatives, yeah, how are we going to maximize that and harness that energy and work together?
Through the chair, that will be answered this afternoon at 2:30 through the integrated catchment management and catchment action plan proposed approach that you'll have a workshop on.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Calvert?
I'm looking at page 21, and I'm guessing that number 68 meant to have a M for millions on it, or is it, did we just receive $3.94?
Good deal.
I mean, you know, we're doing a lot for our money.
Just quietly.
Yeah.
Through the chair. Yes.
The 67, is it still in this national program sense, the position where MPI contracts us, we contract contracts the trust, or?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
Because this says we're the recipient and we work collectively with those people. I'm not sure that's quite therefore the description of what's happening, where we have a contract with DOC.
That's Howard.
I guess.
Yes. Through the chair, I don't, was that a question? I don't understand what the question is.
Well, the question is that description in 67 right when actually there's a contractual relationship going? I'm just got the lawyer's hat on here.
You're on page
going,
69, Councillor Kelvin, aren't you?
I'm on page 21.
Oh, 21.
Number
Sorry, my apologies.
67.
Paragraph.
And I'm just thinking that since the relationships are actually determined by the contracts, like we've taken on an obligation for MPI and that's been carried out from our point of view by DOC, is it a bit confusing when it says 67 is we're working with the people 2 things away from our contract?
Through the chair, I guess we have multiple types of relationships which could be phrased in any way. So we are the recipient, so we are the contractual relationship holder with MPI, and that it's mirrored in DOC. However, we also work on a day-to-day basis collectively by supporting the works of those groups, by backing it up with compliance, by being members of the committees for those 2 trusts. For example, 2 weeks ago, one of my staff members joined the Central Otago Trust and the Central Otago District Council on a public meeting in Alexandra about the wilding conifer issue. So we're not just a fund holder, we're also a collaborator, a facilitator, a funder, a compliance, a regulator. So it's meant to describe the range of roles that OIC holds in that relationship or environmental outcome.
Yeah, I'd sort of quite like it to be clearer, but that's like, is DOC in there at all?
Yes, through the chair, DOC is contracted by ORC to deliver some of those outcomes with the trusts.
So it's not described there. I'm just saying that description I don't think is a describes what is actually there. And we do know that it matters which part of that role we're taking at any given time for our obligations up and down the chain or sideways, or I guess my question is whether you think it's that accurately describes what's going on, and I guess your answer is yes, it does. So
thank you, Councillor Calvert. Councillor Forbes, Councillor Laws, and then Councillor Kelleher. Councillor Forbes, please.
I was delighted to see how much is going on here, and thank you for that. It's really, really good to get the breadth of everything in this one document. It's awesome. One of the things that concerns me is a lot of this is funded with things like Jobs for Nature, and that funding's going to run out 2 years, 2.5 years, 3 years. And I'm just wondering if you're starting to think now how we might, from this point, maximize those gains, find the cash to carry on. Are we starting to think about that at this point?
Through the chair, it's definitely been raised, and it's definitely an issue. And I guess that depends on how the council may wish to continue some of those maintaining the gain. So we've got some budget item already in the long-term plan under the maintaining the gain heading, but that was proposed, I guess, before COVID and before the massive injection of, $40 million it will be soon in the region. So it's probably a bit out of my level of responsibility, but it's an issue both in terms of COVID, but also those national programs where we have set up that expectation. So it's something that does require relatively quick thought on.
I'd like to see us keeping an eye on that.
Keeping on that. Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Councillor Laws, and then Councillor Kelleher.
I guess I'm going to raise the same thing that Gary is, maybe. Rabbits, because quite a bit of your report's on rabbits, Andrea. So first of all, there seems to be some good news, but any time the government gets involved in anything, it tends to fall over. So I'm looking at that National Rabbit Management Coordination Group. Can you tell me a little bit more about it, please?
Through the chair, MPI have not yet set that up. So that doesn't stop us just getting on and restating that ourselves between the councils. So rabbits are an issue in Manawatu and the Hawke's Bay. And we've already made contact with Marlborough. So operationally, we are informally doing that anyway. It would probably be strengthened by having that overall MPI oversight, and that's Gavin and I have met with MPI about that, as I've said, and we'll continue to follow up with them about what role they might play in that. But regardless, we can still do that because it's the right thing to do.
Let me get this right. They haven't committed yet to getting involved, and presumably they haven't put any money into their budget to do so.
Through the chair, that's my understanding, but they were definitely keen to see a group re-established. So
now moving on to the rabbits to do with your report, which is very good. Can I take you to the rural inspections rabbit management, which is on my page 28, 29, but paragraphs 83 onwards. First of all, the July and October, is that 3 months or 4 months? Is July and October both included, or is it a 3 month or a 4 month period?
through the chair, 3 months.
3 months, okay. I note that there were 79 inspections during that time. So that's roughly 24 a month. But then if I take you to paragraphs, to the actual projects that you're going to be doing in Gibbston, Lake Hayes, Moeraki and the Otago Peninsula. I'll give you an example. Gibbston, 173 property inspections. So that's what you're intending to do. Is that correct?
Through the chair, no, that's what we have done.
You've done 173.
Correct.
So, and you've done 236 property inspections in Lake Hayes.
Correct.
Yep. And you've done 89 in Moeraki, and I don't know how many you've done in Dunedin.
That's correct.
So that story about inspections is only a little microcosm of what you've actually done.
That's correct. So that's just, we've separated, I think it was asked for previously, we've separated out the traditional large scale rural inspections from the program inspections. So the image that you have on the top of page 28 was kind of active as when I finalised this report a week or so ago, and we, from the financial year, so the first of July, sorry, that will include July, we had done 414 inspections.
I'm not critical at all of that. I'm just asking the question at the top so then we've done the rabbit inspections. The key issue there is that over 40% of them are non-compliant. Now, that strikes me as very high. When you break it down, over half of the properties that you re-inspected are non-compliant, which is, now at that stage I began, there's something not working here, because if we inspect you and tell you you're over, then the next time we come and inspect you and over half of you are over, we've got a problem. Have you got a problem?
Through the chair, yes, we do, and we'll solve that through now formal compliance, which is something that ORC has perhaps had a different approach in this space to previously. We've got all of our ducks in a row and sorted that out, and so we will be undertaking formal compliance on those properties as of either next week or early January.
Can I ask?
Of direction.
Correct.
Sorry? Yeah. Well, this is really important because it's something we just haven't been doing. So I'm delighted to hear that, but the properties that are non-compliant, can you give us a picture of what sort of properties we're talking about, and where they are? Just are they in Central Otago, Moeraki, Dunedin? Are they scattered across all the show? Is they concentrated in particular areas? That's the first question. And the second and sort of correlative question to that is, as a type of property that you're talking about, because it seems to me, and this is sort of anecdotal, but you can tell me if I'm wrong, that the sort of larger landowners are doing their job in terms of pests, because there's a direct economic correlation between them doing their job and the value of their property and the stuff that they get off it. Can you give me some indication then of what sort of properties we're looking at that just don't fit that criteria?
Through the chair, so the figure 9 and table 1 are the large scale properties that you're talking about, where there is 41% non-compliance. So some are 59% are doing their job well, and 41% need some strong encouragement through a compliance process for us. And I suppose if you're required to do something, but with a carrot, but there's not necessarily a stick behind it, then you may not prioritise that as much as you might otherwise. So, but as you can see from figure 9, they a large proportion of those are just non-compliant. So they just need to do a little bit more work, and then they should be able to fall into the compliant. There's no, so we can't be everywhere. That's based on our rural program that we started last year, which is targeting the Maniatoto, Strathtyre, and West Otago properties from memory. So we've got
from those areas, these,
yes.
most of these non-compliant ones.
Yep. So we've got a mixture of community projects, which is the bulk of our inspections at the moment, because that's where we've been focusing. Those community projects are more the semi-rural, peri-urban, smaller, more urban areas, but we also have to fulfill our responsibilities for those large-scale rural landholders. So that's why we've broken those up. We'll refocus back onto those once we've finished our first level inspections for those areas that are listed under the community projects on page 30. So we'll go back to that rural area, and we're focusing on the areas that have the highest and medium prone rabbit landscapes, and also overlaying that with that new ecological data that we've got, so that we can prioritise not only based on economic values but also on biodiversity values.
Yes, because 6 of those 7 community engagements that you're doing are based in Central Otago Lakes, aren't they?
That's correct. We've got Otago Peninsula and Moraki, the coastal.
Right, right. So
yep.
5 of the 7.
Yep.
So you're happy that you've identified those areas. Queensbury, boy oh boy, does it need it, just quietly.
Through the chair, yes, and that's the next one to start.
That'll be a tough one though, won't it? That would be harder than,
through the chair, none of them are easy, but that's fine.
Okay. And then the next question is, when do rabbits start getting killed? Because it does seem, and it's not a criticism, it's just the way the process is working. It takes an awful long time to get to there, to actually rabbits dying on the ground.
So through the chair, rabbits are being killed every day, I'm told, whether that's by cats or by contractors or anything. Thank you for your efforts in that regard. What we're trying to do is not short-term fixes. So what we've got going on at the moment are the likes of the Department of Conservation properly engaging with their landowners to fence and share the costs in Gibbston and Lake Hayes. So I think success would not look like immediate one-off poison control work. We're trying to do this properly, which is long-term sustained approaches with communities working together. And it's not easy for the communities. It's certainly not easy for us, but it seems to be, we seem to be on the positive trajectory where people, every single person, or groups, I should say, of landowners are working collaboratively together and understand what's required of them, committed to doing something. But we are trying to do that in a coordinated way, which will take longer, but we'll get a better outcome.
On feedback though, and I know that Gary would have got it, and so would Alexa and Carmen as well, is the one option we don't have, and I just, is the idea of we'll do it in rature. So we'll kill them, or we'll organise the killing and we'll rate you.
Yes.
No. That wasn't offered at Gibbston, at Lake Hayes, as you know. Is that option being offered to others? Because I'm hearing a negative here, but I know what they said at Lake Hayes.
Through the chairs, we haven't pursued that at the moment. It is one of the things that people default to because they don't actually know the cost. So you know, in my mind, it's a bit like if we're trying to achieve a water quality outcome and we know that riparian planting is the way to go. ORC doesn't necessarily stand up a nursery because we're adding an extra layer of infrastructure. There are nursery providers out there, so that's an analogy. So at the moment, there are plenty of pest contractors. They contact me weekly. They have demand and they have the skills and expertise to undertake that work.
That's right. Yeah, they do.
What we're trying to establish is like equivalents of the Manitoto pest model, the Pisa moorings model, which has been in the media and have done a fantastic job where people contribute to a collective entity within their local community, and that entity engages with the contractors. That cuts out what could be seen as an extra layer of bureaucracy and cost, and the community, all environment, you know, it's well known that environmental projects that are owned by the community are more successful than those that are imposed on them.
Except in some of those areas, you've got an awful lot of absentee owners who are, a lot of those areas, for example, up to half.
Through the chair, so I just got called by somebody yesterday in Christchurch who is an absentee landowner in Moraki, but wasn't able to get down to the meeting, but wanted to know what was going on and how they could contribute. So that's just one example. But if we're doing our core role, which is compliance, understanding and clearly outlining what the rules are, I think the absentee landowner will always be a challenging, but no more challenging than a current present landowner who doesn't want to do anything. We've got tools to deal with that, and it's just a matter of us dealing with it in the way that we're mandated to, and that's what we're going to be doing.
Thank you, Ms Howard. Before I go to Councillor Callagher and then Councillor Wilson, Mrs Garden would like to respond.
I was just going to fill in a small tiny blank. I agree with everything Ms Howard has said. The way Councillor Laws described it was we'll kill their things and rate for them. Well, in effect, that's our last resort in terms of our compliance tool, which is we can do that. We can kill things and then charge people. However, it is a last resort, and there are a number of steps we take before we get to that point.
Thank you. Councillor Callagher, then Councillor Robinson.
Cool, thanks. I did have some questions on rabbits. To me, actually, what figure 9 was showing, and this is a really good report, is actually, we are pretty close to compliance. It's actually quite positive given that rabbit numbers are ramping up. And these inspections are undertaken in the breeding season. So it's the start of the breeding season, the numbers are ramping up. If you wanted to know what is the end result of rabbits across a year, because these landowners will be managing their rabbits on a year-by-year basis, then the 3 months leading up to about the mid-June or whatever is the best time to know what are your rabbits as an end result for the year. So someone not doing anything in this first period when we're monitoring here now escalates to a point across the year where it worsens completely. So I'm hopeful that in those areas we are doing the very targeted approach, that we will be seeing that, and it's all about what they do year by year by year and regularly, as opposed to just a one-off hit and then nothing more. One question with rabbits, is the ORC still available to receive carcasses for testing, for virus testing?
Through the chair, I believe so. We have been doing our own as well, so I would have to double check that, but we've recently collected our own carcasses from across the region to undertake that testing.
And is any of the testing showing which virus is effective? Is it like, is the newly released virus, is there any signs of that actually appearing?
We haven't got the results back of the latest round of testing, so I've just processed the invoice yesterday to get that sorted, so we'll bring back a paper on that. Cool. So that we can, and we've been collecting and refining all of our historic data so that we're able to do that in a bit more comprehensive manner than we have in the past. I've got some more analytical skill sets in the team to be able to look at that data in a different way, so there's definitely more opportunity to use the data that we have collected both now and in the past to show those trends over time.
Right, thank you. One more question just on wallabies. I had a question posed to me around the importance of killing a wallaby if you see it, as opposed to leaving it and going through the official process for someone else to do it. And it was a large-scale landowner next door to a large dock area, and they had the means to kill a wallaby. They had heard that there was a wallaby would be potentially in sight of their boundary. What is the protocol for, say, a landowner like that who, if it's on public lands or dock lands or whatever, are wallabies escalated to a point that if they can do it safely, they should deal to that animal immediately? Or do they have to drive all the way back to the homestead, ring the 0800 number and lose the opportunity?
Through the chair, that's a tricky one, but generally I believe it's, I'm not up on the law, but you probably shouldn't undertake control activities on someone else's land. But knowing that that's a possibility, if it was me, I would have, now that, I mean, if there's one there, there may be another one in the future, just contacting the Department of Conservation and asking them what their viewpoint is. I mean, if it's public land where people are walking, there'll be certain protocols around that. So it's really a conversation between landowners, and ideally any wallaby sighting should be reported to Otago Regional Council, and we can quickly facilitate having that conversation with Department of Conservation if needed.
Would we be able to have that conversation now? Because when I look at the maps of where wallaby control is being undertaken, and I look at the scale of obviously what is GPS tracking of where the guys are going, then the decision to shoot that one wallaby that might be 20 metres over your boundary then saves that what might be $50,000 worth of helicopter time, men on the ground, dogs, all that exercise. And if these people are landowners who are proficient in pest control anyway, could we get an understanding from DOC if it was under those parameters, they would be accepting of those landowners dealing to those things because they live with DOC land next to them, they are watching it explode in weeds and pests and everything else. That is all the result of tenure review and others, and they are left struggling to manage their own situation.
Through the chair, so what we can definitely do is look at wallabies, known wallaby sightings and potential wallaby sightings, and the different crossover, where there are public land and crossovers, or well, there's not going to be a crossover, but you know what I mean, and have a meeting with the Department of Conservation and get their views on whether that's acceptable or not. Well, I can't make a decision on behalf of someone else's land, but we can have that conversation.
Ask the question.
Yep.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Thank you for waiting.
Thanks. Just want to say that I love the app. It's fantastic. And the fact that we've developed them in other areas as well, like the flyovers. I think we saw an app that had been developed as well. The fact that you then can mesh onto something that's really visual, there's nowhere to hide for anyone. So they can see exactly how many inspections, well, we can see at the moment, exactly how many inspections we've done, where, what the results were. And then there's all those tools in the tool basket that we've already talked about that are existingly available to us. And were weighed up when we were doing the pest plan, so that if we use all those tools, we will get outcomes. So yeah, it's going to be really accountable for us to be doing so. And I've got no reason to think that we won't be. We've been doing a heap of inspections there. But the question is, that's really great, transparent. Will people in the community be able to see that level of detail, or is that an internal tool? And the other one would be, I guess we're going to see this afternoon with the integrated catchment planning, just how this type of geographical data, perhaps that we might gather across the council, it all comes together then. Is this an example of one of those scenarios?
Through the chair, so what we would aim to show publicly and in a spatial manner was the areas in which we're working in. What we wouldn't do was, and I had to make a double check this morning when I looked at this diagram, show compliance outcomes, because that's private information.
Right.
So, but we would be able to show the areas in which we have undertaken, because normally we will work in a block method of undertaking inspections across valleys and sensible geographic areas, as well as being responsive to complaints. So that's definitely the type of activity that would appear on a layer and a spatial representation of our work that you'll hear more about this afternoon.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Malcolm, yes, it's you.
Look, and sorry, I don't think I've got a question here, but look, Dr. Palmer, I'd just like to pass on our congratulations from me and probably the other councillors that were there at Mauraki and Ms. Howard's team that led a very boisterous, fully packed community meeting in the first instance, and that I did get rung by one of the constituents saying that I should have been up taking the flag instead of having two ladies taking it, but I think they've done a far better job than I would have done. It was a very constructive meeting. The second stage of it was, I think, even more constructive, and the vibes I'm getting now in a very difficult environment to do things. We seem to have, we certainly have got iwi, local farmers and local community actually really prepared early next year to sit down and get something going. So, and on a long-term plan as opposed to a short-term fix. So thanks for Ms. Howard and your team. Very, very good job done. I'm sure we'll get some results. So it's a pretty good model, I think. And we just got to, one thing we need to do from this wee report we had this morning is make sure we get that out in the community and say what we are actually doing, because I think it's absolutely critical. So it was a very good approach, and we'll make sure it hits some goals next year. So
thank you,
team.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Noon.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. Hey, thank you very much for the detailed, comprehensive report. I had a couple of questions. One was, and I hope I didn't miss it early on in your introduction, Andrea, but one was, when do you think you'll be fully staffed up, for the want of a better word?
Through the chair, hopefully by the end of January. So there's, I think, 2 remaining roles, which I have interviewed for this week, and hopefully we'll have a successful outcome from those. So we've had a large number of staff start in the last 6 weeks, which has been fantastic. So we're 95% there.
Cool. I had a ring last night from a rabbit contractor, and he asked me the question about what is a biosecurity services panel, and are you able to share that with us? And then I'll just pass it back to him, pass back the answer.
Through the chair, yes. So because we've had the fortunate circumstances of getting quite a large increase in external funding, we're trying to move away from an ad hoc process, both for contractors and for staff to manage, in terms of selecting contractors who can help us with the range of tasks that we need to be undertaken. And part of that is the traditional work around wallaby control and surveillance. We're also entering into new spaces like service delivery, which means ORC being responsible for control of wilding pines in the Luggett area. We also need a bit of help in order to meet community and council's expectations of us. So we're seeking support to help with our surveillance and our monitoring of things like rabbits. So we've gone out with a range of different requirements, and we're asking for expressions of interest, for want of a better word, from contractors to see who wants to assist us. And then that will be a 3-year term. So we'll select a pool of contractors that then we can go to over the next 3 years to issue individual contracts for work. So rather than doing that annually or by activity, we've wrapped it all up into one package so that it's one process for us and one process for contractors. That doesn't mean that a contractor that wants to submit a proposal has to do everything. So we're looking for a mix of locally specific contractors with knowledge about that area that can respond quickly, but they don't necessarily have the capacity to do the region-wide program. So it's really a more tidy process that allows us to meet our procurement requirements, but also minimise the paperwork, I guess, of doing that annually.
Cool. Thank you for allowing me to ask that question because it's beyond the scope of the report. But just with regards to the report, really pleased to see some of those themes and that we discussed in great detail as the development of the regional pest management plan, working in collaboration with our neighbours, north and south and west, and obviously working with that community. All those sorts of themes, are coming through, and it's only a matter of relatively short time. We're going to see more and more outcomes, as the question from Councillor Robertson, sorry. And that's what the community is probably looking for, but we're building nicely, which is great.
Thank you. Just before I go to you, Councillor Wilson, I concur with what Councillor Malcolm said, Mrs. Gardner, that Moraki was testing. It was more than 65, wasn't there in the room the first night, and it had dwindled to 25 in the second night. But there were some great conversations had. There was some bit of jostling and it got a bit towy at times, but we're there, we're chatting. And I think it doesn't matter who you are, if you're public or you're Crown land, watch out. That's really what we're saying to you. We're here to have conversations, and maybe the rabbits might run and hide, but you can't hide from your responsibilities. And I think that's a really important thing. Councillor Wilson, would you like to talk?
I'll echo that. I've heard from other constituents about how well the Moraki ran. Well done to staff and contractors there. My question, I'm sorry, I'm going backwards, but I started the questioning and it didn't get back to me. So I've just got one question. It's probably a bigger question and you may or may not be able to answer. The landscape catchment management and the scale you're doing it in, and I'm referring mainly to the catchment action plans in paragraph 26. And this is one that's coming up in my mind in my discussions with people regularly, is the scale of catchment plans meeting FMUs, and it works in some places but it doesn't work in others, and just testing your E under that, be developed at the freshwater management unit scale. It works when there's a similarity. When you've got a situation with the Catlins where you've got two, I think, catchment groups which deal with two different quality water sources, and equally in the FMU, which I have some issues with, which is Dunedin and Coast, where they're quite separate catchments, how will that look? Or will it be very much at catchment scale at that rather than FMU?
Through the chair, so we'll go into more detail of that in this afternoon, but from a broader environmental implementation perspective, I'm using the FMU to focus, but it's not an exact science. So it is obviously focused on freshwater and the areas that I'm responsible for, biodiversity and biosecurity. So you have to have a bit of a pragmatic application to that. And I suppose flipping that round, that you'll take possibly some lead from the community and how it best wants to be activated as well. Absolutely. Great. So, sorry, I haven't received, apologies, we've had some technical issues and I haven't seen the paper this afternoon. So that's why I'm jumping that. I just won't come up in my diligent apologies for that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, before I go to Councillor Keller, now Dr. Palmer, you had your hand up and I apologise because you're patiently waiting, and then it's Councillor Kelleher and then Councillor Wilson. Would you, Dr.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I just wanted to come back to Councillor Noon's first question about fully staffed up. Yes. Just reminding Council that we have a multi-year expansion program. Yes. So by January, it'll be in the current financial year, but subject to decisions you make about future annual plans, there will be more staff being added to this team in a staged manner.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer. Sorry to keep you waiting. Now we have Councillor Kelleher, you wanted just to say something?
Yeah, just sorry to speak again, but I just wanted to commend you on that sort of coordination of contractors position. Yes. And because to me, what I see out amongst the contractors is that we are lucky. We have an incredibly proficient lot of contractors out there, but they are tending to be latter in years. They are not as proficient in bidding and understanding tender documents. But they have the skills to deal to the job. And to me, I know we keep getting asked about, let's go back to rabbit boards, but the key is actually coordinating the contractors into the right place so that everything gets done where it needs to be. And that's the best bang for buck when you are dealing with pest control. So anything that aligns us towards having the contractors in a pool able to react quickly, utilising those guys that aren't able to take on an entire contract for an entire region, but actually can be called on at short notice to get a chopper in the air and get some guys to wherever they need to be to react quickly, is where we need to go. So good on you for that, and hopefully that expands into more.
Thank you, Councillor Kelleher. Now, I have Councillor Malcolm here on my right, happy to move the 3 recommendations, but actually, before we do that, Councillor Deaker, are you still there? He is there?
Yes, I am.
Councillor
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, I wondered
Thor-
if you
thoroughly enjoying
wanted
the discussion.
Good. I'm sure you've had plenty of rabbit pie over your many young years in Southland with your Swedes. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I did. My mother was a wonderful rabbit cook. No, I had 3 questions at the start of this paper. They have all been answered. Thanks to Andrea.
Thank you. Just before I move to what you're asking Councillor Malcolm, which is to remove, there's a couple of questions I have. We're doing community-led. I see we've got 15 projects. The first starts at Hukariri in West Otago. We're going right across the region. I've noticed we've got North Otago, we've got some Pomahaka, we've got a Clutha, and it's great. Tucker's Beach, that sort of thing. Are you happy with how that's going? We haven't really asked you any of those sorts of questions this morning. How are we going with those? Those community-led, is that where our catchment people come into? I'm trying to make the links here between our community and what we're doing. Please, it's just right at the start.
Through the chair, yes, so a lot of those, all of those projects, I guess, have been funded by central government, and we have various degrees of involvement in those. Where, some we're on the steering group level, and some we're providing practical assistance in terms of planting advice or turning up to help plant things and celebrate their successes. So no, I think the catchment groups who have received that funding are doing a fantastic job, and we're very lucky that the government has invested, and there are community resources to be able to take advantage of those opportunities.
Thank you, and I'm delighted to see you've got in there, we've got education, we've got the clean, check and dry coming up this summer, and I just wanted to know what lakes we're at. Are we at Dunstan? Are we at Wakatipu? Are we at Hawea? Forgive me if you wrote that and I didn't see it.
Through the chair, it is in a footnote. There's a lot of them, so it's on page 26.
Okay. Thank you. There's that, and the other thing I wanted to say was I understand also, is it the Wallabies we're doing drones at night as well?
Through the chair, yes, we've just done I call it an unpersoned, I think it's called unmanned, but unpersoned aerial surveillance over a couple of nights above Lake Hawea. So
how's that going? Is it going all right?
Depends on your metric of success, but we found nothing. So
that's good. That's good.
Very good answer.
Very good.
We thank the government for funding that. So yeah, I mean, it's trialling and working with contractors who really are at the forefront of that innovative technology. It's not without its administrative hurdles around unmanned, unpersoned aerial surveillance, has civil aviation requirements, but it's really great to have new tools and techniques to kind of to help in the fight against, in this particular example, wallaby eradication.
And finally, Ms. Howard and Dr. Palmer, I see the catchment teams. We've got winter grazing, we're partnering with Beef and Lamb, which is always exciting. And this time too, we're also going to go and visit the wine growers. Am I correct about that?
It's correct. I'll be doing that this time tomorrow. So
fantastic. we look to forward to that. All those are success stories.
You find nothing there as well.
Let's hope. Well, Ms. Howard and Dr. Palmer, 39 pages or so of absolute jam-packed factual information. And I thank you very much. And I have Councillor Malcolm, who's moved the 3 recommendations. Do I have a seconder? I do. I have Councillor Forbes. So all those in favour? Aye. Aye. I thank you very much for my co-chair, Brian Scott. And that is the first part of 7.1 done. Thank you, Dr. Palmer and Ms. Howard. And Dr. Palmer, you get to stay in the hot seat. Okay. 7.2, outcomes from Dunedin electric bus trial. Here we go. We have the next lot of staff. You still there, Councillor Deaker?
Yes, I am, and I'm looking forward to this report.
This is you here, yes. I'm looking forward to it too, Councillor Deaker. Did it come up your way at Signal Hill?
No, it didn't.
Next time.
Nothing to do with the bus, it's just the quality of people that wanted on it.
Good morning. Here we have the 7.2 outcomes from Dunedin electrical bus trial. And we'll start by introducing. We have Julian Phillips. We have your team leader for public transport. Good morning. We have Abby Chamberlain, implementation advisor for transport. It's a good Southern name, Chamberlain's. And we have Dr. Palmer here on our right. Did we have somebody else? No, this is it.
There are two online.
And we have Peter. I'm very sorry. I apologise to you. Gary Maloney from Manager of Transport, and also online, we're not forgetting, we have present on Zoom, and I welcome you, Mike Parker, Executive Vice President from Global Bus Ventures, and we have Russell Turnbull, Director Business Development for Go Bus Transport. Morning, gentlemen, and welcome.
Thank you.
There we are. I can see one of you on the right down the bottom, and I'm not sure, the other one must be somewhere there, not on the bus. Okay. Would you like to take us through, Abby, what you have found on your outcomes from the Zanin electric bus trial?
Absolutely. So thanks for having me today. I just have a short presentation to go through, kind of summarising what the trial was all about.
Sure.
So if it's okay with you all, I would like to wait until the end to answer any questions, if that's okay.
Certainly. We're in your hands. Let's have the presentation.
Excellent. So we ran a trial of an electric bus in partnership with Go Bus Transport from September 28th until October 29th this year. For us, it was a really good opportunity to trial an electric vehicle on the Dunedin network, as there hadn't been one here before, and also to get an idea of how it might look operating on the Dunedin terrain with more hills and that kind of thing. Go Bus Transport already operate electric vehicles in other centres such as Christchurch, but Christchurch doesn't have quite the same hills, so this was a good opportunity for them to test as well.
Yeah, it must just be about to happen.
We have it on diligent.
We've got it on diligent, yes. There we are. There's our other gentleman. Hello, good morning.
Are you
See
using
now?
the,
Because I can't quite get this to
is,
change.
are you, is it not working?
No.
Okay, we've just got small technical
Sorry.
detail here. Julian's going to see if it'll work.
Sorry about this.
It's all right. Stop. Gentlemen that are just watching from Zoom, we're just waiting. Modern technology is a wonderful thing when it works. Here we go. Maybe. I did work yesterday. Tested it some. Don't know again.
There it goes. Which one is it? This one. Excellent. Sorry about
This
that.
one. It's all right.
Yeah. So the key objectives that we had for the trial are listed on the slide here. So testing the on-road running performance and maximum runtime of the vehicle. This is obviously, there's been a large amount of commentary around other electric vehicles and the range and the challenges, and obviously a lot of anxiety about that. So wanted to test how that would look. For some context, the longest route operated by GoBus is the route out to Mosgiel number 77, which is 18.5 kilometres in one direction. We wanted to test the PVR requirement, so that is the peak vehicle requirements, so the number of vehicles required to operate the service in peak times. We wanted to have a go at gauging passenger interest and climate change, and making sure that we were putting out messaging and making the public aware of council's efforts on decarbonisation within public transport. and making sure that everybody knows that we are very proactive about this. And then a big part of the trial as well was looking to improve attitudes around public transport. So getting out on board and doing a survey and talking to people about why we were running the trial. And then that last point there, just having the assurance that electric vehicles would actually function on our network and be an operational option for us as opposed to the current fleet that we have. I'm going to hand over here for a little bit to Mike Parker from Global Bus Ventures to talk a little bit about the bus and the technology itself. What you see on the screen there is just a quick overview of the bus, and Mike can give you a little bit more information.
Yeah, hi, thanks Abby. Hope you can all hear us all right.
Yeah.
So as the slide sort of suggests, I myself work for Global Bus Ventures here in Rolleston, so it's a New Zealand built and designed electric vehicle. Obviously 100% pure electric. It is custom designed and built for the New Zealand requirements. So we do build it using a specialist chassis material, so it's very rust protected against the seaside environments that you experience in Dunedin. It's an aluminium bodied bus, which makes it lighter. And that's quite a key feature that we've found in designing the electric vehicles. As weight is quite a big issue for them, and a lot of imported vehicles do come in quite heavy by the time you have the normal bus plus all the electric kit. So there's been a lot of design work into reducing the weight to make it New Zealand and legal compliant, so it can run on New Zealand roads. Plus it also gives the great benefit, obviously, that the reduced weight gives a better efficiency of the vehicle, so it does get greater range than other vehicles that are out there. And this was a huge opportunity for us to be able to trial that vehicle in Dunedin. As Abby said, the vehicles are running around here in Christchurch with GoBus and doing exceptionally well, but it's a real good opportunity for us to put it through its paces in the hilly environment. And it's, we're really happy to be able to announce that it exceeded our performance expectations down there in Dunedin. The battery capacity was obviously far greater than what we needed, so it never had any difficulties in achieving the range that required. The big scary hills that you have down there in Dunedin, it certainly climbed with ease. A lot of the operators or the drivers were very happy and commenting that it was the easiest bus to drive up the hills. The electric torque actually makes it far smoother and easier for them to manage up through the hills. So they very much enjoyed it. The motor electrical performance was well within range. The vehicles never got hot or overheated. They, in fact, only got up to about half their operating maximum temperature. So there's certainly comfort there for us knowing that there is no issues using this kind of vehicle long term in the Dunedin environment. And as I say, weight is the biggest issue. So the next step would be to determine the exact range that vehicle does need down there. We obviously found out that it only used about half its battery capacity on most of the days in service. So there's potential for us to redesign that, bring that capacity back a bit. That would therefore lighten the vehicle up and give it even better range and performance down on your streets. The only comment I suppose that we got was slightly negative was around the turning circle of the vehicle. They found that it was a little bit hard to get around some tight corners, but we've got to make sure we do put that into perspective, that the turning circle of that vehicle was well within the New Zealand legal limits, and it's also very similar to some of the diesel buses that are operating down there now. So it's not worse than what you've got. It could be improved. And as I say, obviously, if we decided to reduce the capacity range of that vehicle, we can then reconfigure the geometry of the vehicle slightly differently and overcome that issue as well. So it's been a great learning curve from us, and we've really appreciated being involved in it. And it's, as I said, it's exceeded our expectations and proves that it's perfectly viable to have electric buses in Dunedin.
Thank you for that. May we take this opportunity? Does anybody have a question?
I do.
Okay, let's go. Councillor Kelleher, Councillor Calvert, Councillor Scott.
Thank you. It's really impressive that from day one we have had such a good sort of outcome really in battery life. Is it understood across, say, a 5 or 10 year period or longevity of the life of the bus, does that battery life diminish so that what you actually find, like it does in other appliances and things that are run on battery, that if we signed up to some of these now that actually you find by year 2 or 3, these things are needing to be recharged at a far more rapid timeframe?
Yes, certainly. As with any battery technology, they degrade over life. So what you need to do is specify the range based on the end life of the batteries, not the beginning life of the batteries. So as an example, that particular bus, it's designed to do 300 kilometres range in circuit in Christchurch every single day. Currently, it can do 400 to 450k range, but in 10 years' time, which is about the life of the battery start to age right down, it'll reduce down to that 330 sort of k range. So you do need to plan your batteries based on the end of life of the batteries, not the beginning life. But the battery technology nowadays is good for like 10 years. So it is quite some time.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Calvert, and then Councillor Wilson.
I think 3 queries. First one is I don't understand quite about the weight, because this says something about them being us being concerned that they're heavier and things about the bridges and the likes, and yet on the bus it says lighter weight and smaller size.
That's in comparison with diesel vehicles. So the vehicle that we had on loan from GoBus through Global Bus Ventures is approximately 1 tonne heavier than our standard diesel bus that we have in the fleet, but it's the lightest electric vehicle that you can get in New Zealand at the moment, and it is New Zealand built for that purpose. I don't know, Mike, if you wanted to add something else.
Yeah, it is that. New Zealand has very light axle weights compared to international standards because of our road services and because of our bridges. So the electric vehicles are generally a bit heavier than diesels, so it does need to be considered. And to achieve what we've done took a lot of engineering to reduce the weight out of that vehicle to meet the New Zealand laws. So if you are buying electric vehicles, you do need to consider the weight of them to confirm exactly where you can and can't operate them.
Yeah, so when it says lighter weight on the side of the bus, it isn't actually lighter weight compared with what we've currently got at all. And it can't be, because it's a different thing, but it isn't lighter weight. So.
Yeah, unfortunately, batteries are heavier than diesel. Batteries are heavier than diesel fuel. So by the time you put all the batteries onto a vehicle, with the equivalent sort of range of a diesel engine and fuel, it adds weight to a vehicle.
Yeah. I can understand why it's a lighter version of an electric one, but it's confusing to say on the side of it it's lighter when it isn't lighter than what we're comparing it with, sort of. The second thing is the turning circle. I gather it is actually the wheelbase or whatever is further apart or longer or wider or something. A bus driver said it was harder to turn when I had a wee go on the lovely bus. And I see, and it concerns me a little, that it says here sort a version of, it doesn't really matter too much if you have really experienced drivers and they're driving nicely or something. We don't necessarily, and we can't guarantee that there's going to be good drivers. And we've got, from the bus hub in particular, right angles. So it isn't just sort of at some of our roads, we have right angles right out of the bus hub. And anyone who stands anywhere near the curb at the moment in say George Street, where it turns around there, you're into the hub from coming south along George Street, you wouldn't want to stand anywhere near the corner of there. They go regularly over that corner. And if this is going to be worse, that's an issue which can't just be sort of, in some respects, glossed over if you had an experienced enough driver. I don't know how you can get around those corners. They can only just do it, some of them, but they mostly struggle going round right angle corners. I gather, so that's sort of a question of how we deal with that, apart from assuming that all drivers will be experienced. But I gather part of the thing is that a smaller electric bus would do it. And I gather this comes in a smaller version if we wanted a smaller version. Is it out of scope of where you're suggesting that we next go to look at what the issues would be if we got some buses like this only smaller, because that would solve the turning circle and reduce the total cost and things. I mean, I know that there's peak times and things, but I would like to know, to understand, if we just said, let's try some smaller ones, how many could we do without a big problem, and what is the big problem that we would encounter by having smaller ones?
Okay, yeah, so I can address those quite comfortably for you. So in terms of the current layout of that bus, it's perfectly optimized and configured to do a very, very, very long range operation in Christchurch. So therefore it's carrying a lot of weight and batteries, and to get the balance of the vehicle correct for the New Zealand weights, we have within standard, but quite a long wheelbase, which does affect that turning circle. It's not such a problem here in Christchurch, but obviously in Dunedin it seems to pop up a bit more. So the best way to address that would be to really seriously consider the exact range you need out of the vehicle. Now, given we only used half the battery capacity throughout each day, we're potentially carrying more than what we need with that design. So by reducing the battery capacity, I can then redesign the chassis and bring that wheelbase shorter to give you a tighter turning circle. So that's a way of addressing it on the bigger vehicle to get around your turning circle. The alternative is to leave it how it is, reduce the turning wheelbase, but then you won't be within the New Zealand axle weights. It'll go overweight on the rear. So not such a desirable option. And then obviously to address the smaller vehicle, yes, we can either make that particular vehicle a row of seats shorter, which will bring in that wheelbase and reduce the size, and still have the same, or actually further range, because it's a smaller, lighter vehicle. So yeah, it can be designed to match and get around all the issues that you're bringing up.
Thank you. Councillor Kelby, you have one more? That's fine.
Other thing, I thought when I got on it that it didn't have a flat floor. Has it got a flat floor?
It does.
Yes, it does. Yeah, it has a flat floor
I
right
I
up.
thought I went at the back. You go up, don't you? A step or something.
The last step, right?
If I can, Madam Chair, most
certainly, Gary.
You're stepping up from basically the rear door
Yes.
on this vehicle because of the way it's built and the batteries and that you basically flat floor almost to the rear seat.
Wow.
So it's much better.
Quite a shift, isn't
Yes,
it?
so it does go up at the back.
Yes.
What was the question I asked? So it isn't.
Well,
It's completely flat.
It does go up at the.
it's a matter of degree. It's the second to last seat. There's a step there.
Yeah, so that has a step, but isn't a flat floor, was the question I was asking. It isn't a flat floor. It's a lot flatter than the current ones, but it isn't.
Flat floor to the back.
Not to the back.
It's a step up to the rear seat.
There you are.
The rear
But
line.
last two, yeah.
Madam Chair, I just wonder if we just get through the
Dr. Palmer.
presentation, because some of these questions are getting into the operating environment that Mr.
Okay.
Turnbull will speak with too. So perhaps we go
Sure.
through the presentation and then come back to all questions
All
if
right.
you agree.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Moving on to talk about some of the statistics. So you can see listed here the driving hours and kilometres travelled. These were mostly operated on the following 4 routes. So Route 8, which is St Clair, our most popular route. Route 77, testing on the Mosgiel service to see how it would operate on the motorway with the higher speeds. And then routes 44 and 55 between St Kilda, Halfway Bush and Brockville, which are our hillier most populous suburbs. So giving the bus a good go on varying topography. In addition to these routes that we operated every day in service, we also took the bus out of service to do testing on the other routes operated by GoBus, also hillier suburbs, but just not operational in service, and encountered no issues, which was really positive. As mentioned before by Mike, the average battery usage was between 40 to 50%, which was awesome to see, and obviously eliminated any of that range anxiety that we might have had. The total passengers there equates to the normal service that it was operating, and includes numbers as well from when we took it on events to the Otago Museum. You can see there the number of approximated CO2 savings from this vehicle. It's important to note that this is a like-for-like comparison versus a diesel bus, rather than including any external factors that might come into play in that calculation. a little bit about the community engagement that we had while it was here. So this was one of our key focuses for the trial, was to engage with our community, make sure that they knew what we were doing and why we were doing it, get more information out to the public about electric vehicles in general, what they looked like, what they sounded like, how they drove. And so we had the bus at the museum during the school holidays, and we worked with the staff there to have science communicator like staff on board, giving presentations and information to passengers to help educate people around what was going on. And the bus was also going on shorter rides, allowing passengers to get a feel for the bus without having to catch it while it was in service. In total, over these 4 days that it was there, we had 253 passengers who rode on the bus. There were, of course, more people who came to look at it and visit, but we don't have exact numbers for those. As well, with our community engagement, we ran an onboard survey, as well as having that available for people to do online if they weren't on board when the survey was undertaken. Feedback from that was overwhelmingly positive, which was really good to see. People were excited about a potential switch to electric vehicles. They were excited to see what was going on. Sorry?
Yeah. That's Councillor Deacon just endorsing.
Oh, excellent, thanks. Yeah, so passengers, the survey results were really positive. Everyone enjoyed the bus being there, and there were a few comments as well about wanting it to stay longer. And then our social media campaigns created a lot of engagement, as you'll see in the report. Over 6.7 thousand engagements on some of our posts, which is awesome to see. That's through running competitions, and those are infographics that we were posting, more information about the bus, how it's made, all of that kind of thing. So reaction from the community was really positive. Some of the key learnings from the trial. So Hillary's touched on some of these a little bit earlier in the presentation. So the weight of the vehicle, as noted, as being about 1 tonne heavier than our diesel vehicles. It did not meet some of the weight restrictions for 4 bridges in Dunedin. This is noted a little bit more in the report. So there are 4 bridges, 2 of which are currently located on Dunedin routes. These routes were not operated by Go Bus Transport, so were not an issue for us during the trial. You can see on the map on the right, there are 2 red circles. These are overlaid over 2 routes on the Dunedin network, which are currently operated by our other operator. And so going forward, if we were to introduce electric vehicles of the same make or heavier make, we would need to do some investigation with the road controlling authorities as to whether the bridges and the weights could be strengthened, or if there was anything else that we could do to mitigate this challenge. We are already in discussions with the road controlling authorities, both in Dunedin and Queenstown, over weighting restrictions on various roads. So this is something that we're actively looking into already. As Councillor Calvert touched on before, the wider turning circle requires precision operation from drivers, which has to be emphasised in training. So realistically, this means, yeah, it's more difficult to turn around that corner and around that roundabout, and there's a smaller margin for error. I'm sure Russell will be happy to talk to that in a moment when he's presenting. And then the only other thing I really want to note from this trial is, while it was really positive and definitely gives us a good idea of how the bus would operate on current routes operated by Go Bus, it is only representative of part of the network. So you can see on the left, the map is of the Go Bus operated routes rather than the entire network. In the report, you also have a full map of the Dunedin network. I didn't put it on this presentation because I thought it would be too small to get the message across, but there will be some things that need tested for the other routes in the Zanin area, including Route 1, which is out to Palmerston, 62 kilometres, out to Portobello and Port Chalmers, and then some of them with narrower roading infrastructure, including the likes of Opaho Signal Hill area, which will require work again with the road controlling authorities on how we can best manage any infrastructure issues. I will pass over to Russell Turnbull from Go Bus, who will provide a little bit more information about how Go Bus found the experience. You can see here just a couple of quotes from the drivers that we received about their experience. So Russell, over to you.
Thank you, Abby, and through the chair. I won't go through the driver quotes, but I'll just quickly summarise a little bit about why Go Bus brought the vehicle down and what we hope to get from it and what the results were. So, as Abby said, we, as of this week, are running 25 electric vehicles in Christchurch, and since January of this year, 9 in Auckland. And as you said, much of the terrain in those two cities is relatively flat, and we really needed to understand how the vehicle would operate in the different terrain that Dunedin offered. And we were very, very pleased with how it worked. And as kind of Mike kind of hinted, the vehicle is probably slightly over-spec'd for Dunedin in general, so we wouldn't need the kind of range that this particular vehicle is fitted, and hence the ability to perhaps tailor it a little bit better to some of the road conditions that were found. And as Abby said, there are some tight corners and turning required, which this particular vehicle required extra training for, to be sure we weren't going to run into any trouble. And we didn't. But as one of the councillors said, you know, it's better to have a little bit more margin. And we've seen through the trial that margin could be created. So that's a point. At the end of the day, as I said, we didn't have any range problem. We had drivers who were very enthusiastic about the vehicle. It was great to be able to bring it down and show it to them. And that was one of the objectives, is to actually get our staff excited about the future. And it's a big thing for bus drivers going forward, is that they are part of the future of you know, reducing carbon emissions and affecting a better climate for us all going forward. And that's the way we're trying to position the company, is it's a place you are driving the future. So we're really keen about that, and how we excited our staff. And of course, what we really want to do is also show it off to the people of Dunedin and those coming in from the wider Otago area. And we certainly achieved that with great thanks to the council for all the work they did to, you know, make it possible to show it off. So we're really, really very happy with how it worked. We were happy with how it performed on the motorway from Mosgiel. How it performed on the significant routes like Route 8. So all in all, a very positive trial. And going forward, once council decides what its program will be for introducing electric vehicles, then we can tailor the right product to deliver on the services you're after. So really looking forward to that opportunity. That's about me.
Thanks, Russell.
Thank you, Abby.
So moving forward, going back to the objectives here. So looking at what we've got on the screen there, the bus successfully operated on 4 routes, managing 12-hour days and not using more than 50% of battery charge. This was really good to see, and obviously testing it on all of the other Go Bus routes and finding no issues was really positive. Anecdotally, in terms of peak vehicle requirements, we've been told that PVR could increase to 1.3 vehicles for every 1 diesel that we have now. This might not be the case, but there are lots of external factors required, and how many vehicles you require to fulfill a fleet. This is also dependent on charging facilities and whether they are only available at a central location. For example, some of our vehicles in the Go Bus fleet overnight are out in the suburbs, so in Mosgiel, for example, and having electric vehicles replace them completely would mean that those vehicles would have to come to the depot to be charged overnight, which is more kilometres. There are a few more challenges in that area. So that was one of the learnings here. In terms of increasing passenger awareness, we ran lots of events. As I mentioned before, our social media engagement was really good and really positive feedback from the survey, which was great to see. And obviously the biggest question that we got from the public through the surveys and anecdotally from people who'd been on the bus was people asking when we were going to get them, people being really positive about the future within this, which was good. And then, as mentioned before, the bus absolutely could operate the Go Bus routes in Dunedin without issue, so would definitely operate as a functional alternative to our current fleet. So moving forward, everybody wants to talk about the future. So something that's listed a little bit more in detail in the report is about our regional public transport plan and our plans for switching to zero emission. This is in line with the national mandate that was put in place at the start of this year to have no new fossil fuel buses entering service from 2025, with an aspiration to have net zero emissions by 2035. So obviously we will be in line with the national mandate, but we need to work a way to sustainably move to electric vehicles. And so the paper talks about endorsing council staff to create a scope for a transition plan. And so that's what we seek to do following this. Within this, there are a few things to note. As I mentioned before, it's not so simple as just swapping one diesel vehicle for one electric vehicle. You have to consider running kilometres, depot space, how and when charging infrastructure can be installed, and then in addition to that, actual sourcing of the vehicles themselves, not just for electric vehicles but for diesel vehicles as well. At the moment there is a huge a sourcing issue nationwide, and so the lead time on getting new vehicles can be quite long. So it wouldn't be the case of us being able to transition to any new fleet, whether that be diesel or electric, in the immediate future. That would have to be well planned for. And so, yeah, going forward, wanting to scope the transition plan and then work from there. But overall, the trial was seen to have provided really valuable data for us and for GoBus and for Global Bus Ventures, which is really good. Definitely provides a functional alternative to the diesel fleet. And it meant that we had the chance to get a lot more understanding of how the vehicle would operate, how the drivers might feel, how we can message with our passengers, especially those in the low vision community, talking about all of that kind of stuff. Going forward, there'll be a lot more work required with our operators as they look to transition, and with the road controlling authorities both in Dunedin and in Queenstown to work on any infrastructure challenges we might come up with. But yeah, overall looking really positive and a really successful trial. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, before I go to our councillors for questions, firstly, before I do that, Dr. Palmer, Julian or Gary, do you have any further comments that you'd like to make? This is your paper and it's exciting. There's lots going on in this space.
I think the comments about the, it is exciting, and the comments about the road and the turning, they are really important,
yes,
particularly left turns.
Yes.
However, if you cast your minds back to when the bus hub was created, that posed a challenge for existing vehicles.
Yes.
The existing diesel fleet, some of them have twin rear axles that have the same sort of turning challenges the electric bus would have.
Yes.
And we actually worked very well over a period of months with the council, with lots of road closures and practices. And the intersections were actually adapted to allow those buses to make the manoeuvres rather than us having to change our bus fleet out to
Yes.
match the street. So we do have a very good, strong collaborative nature with the DCC and the QLDC.
Good.
And so we've had some initial discussions about those sort of challenges, which we may not have if we move to a smaller type electric vehicle anyway. But it's often the case that the street can be adapted to meet the bus routes, not necessarily just the other way around.
Yes.
So it's just worth raising that issue.
Thank you. Looking bright for a target. Now I had, going back before, we had Councillor Wilson. I think Councillor Scott, you had your hand up? You don't? So Councillor Wilson, Councillor Callagher, and then Councillor Laws.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the staff and GoBus for doing the trial. It's great reports. And to Enviroline or GBV for the building of them. It's exciting to see this happening in New Zealand. My question though is, I think it's Mike, just is it the
Mike from Global Bus Ventures, yeah.
Yes, thank you. Just checking on the design, and you trialled this, I think, in October or spring. How does this go on, especially on hills on very hot summer days, which we get in Dunedin, and also understanding the weight on frosty roads and needing heaters and air conditioning? And that's where I think the batteries may be more tested. Have we got any learnings from Christchurch on that?
Yeah, so the vehicle is fitted with a full air conditioning unit like a diesel bus would be. So it's capable of both heating and cooling the passengers. It also has electric front demister to replace the watertight one that are on diesel, so it demists the front screen. So in terms of the passenger comfort and the safety inside the saloon, the electric vehicles are really no different to the diesels. That certainly does impact on range. There's no doubt about it. It's like any vehicle. If you have your heater and everything turned on in your car, it'll deplete it, your petrol tank faster. So we do see some changes, and it can be, up to 10% sort of change throughout the day quite easily, depending on temperatures. So it is something to factor, but it's not an issue. In terms of the frosty roads, which you get down in Dunedin there, the vehicle is fitted with full EBS and ABS braking safety systems. So it's got all the anti-skid and traction control built in. So they're as safe, if not safer, than any vehicle you can get to drive around.
The frostiness was talking about using the heaters and then the battery. So in Christchurch, when you've got a, minus 10-degree frost that you can get up there as well, and you run the heaters, what is the efficiency of the batteries in those times?
Yeah, so we saw even in Dunedin, you can lose about a 2% capacity loss per about degree you start dropping. So if you had an absolutely freezing day all day, then yeah, you can lose probably up to 10% capacity quite easily.
Okay, no, that's good. I'm intrigued that you've got so many. Oh, sorry, I think it's a question now for Russell. I'm intrigued that you've got so many operating, and really impressive you've got so many operating in Christchurch. Envious, possibly is the other word for it. When you were planning that, I presume you looked at, and what I just wanted to understand the time frame for planning infrastructure like charging stations. What lead-in you had, or was that done for you by the Christchurch or Canterbury region, Environment Canterbury, for the planning of those sort of things, and what the lead-in time is for that planning?
Okay. Through the chair, there was a fortunate coincidence with a tender for new routes in Christchurch. So we were able to firstly put in electric buses into our tender, which meant that we had a plan before we even submitted it to the council. But to answer specifically the question around infrastructure, we need to allow at least 12 months normally to put in new charging infrastructure. That includes a time for design, for getting the appropriate consents, and then importing and installing the actual equipment. It's probably just as long as ordering and getting the buses, to be quite frank. So it's no small job installing infrastructure, and that part of it should never be underestimated.
Great. And last question, thank you. Are you presuming, or has this happened in Christchurch, that having electric buses means it's a lot easier to engage drivers who are enthusiastic because it's a much better experience?
So that's a fantastic point. And if you happen to be in the Christchurch area over the next few weeks, you'll see us actively advertising for drivers on that very same point, on the idea that this is a new technology, it's the way of the future, and by getting behind the wheel, you're really improving an environment in more ways than one. So yeah, you're right on the money, and you should be running the advertising campaign for recruitment for GoBus. Thank you.
Thank you. We now have Councillor Callaghan, followed by Councillor Laws.
Thank you. Yeah, really interesting and positive report. The longevity of the existing fleet, and we've got the 2025 deadline, and then I see in the report it then is followed by a 2035 deadline of where we have to be totally or completely decarbonised. So we're not actually saying we must be electric by 2025, but we have until 2035. And then, so I suppose the existing fleet, as it gets to the end of a bus gets to the end of its life, it would be expected to be replaced with an electric option. We're being asked in this report to prepare for a transition plan, but have we costed what this is going to be costing across this period? Is it factored in our long-term plan, given that the bus network we currently have is horrifically loss-making, and given that there may be some bridges to upgrade which will be horrifically expensive? I'd imagine we have to work with the DCC and others. Will we be getting some cost implications, I guess is my question, and also has it been factored in our long-term plan?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, so there isn't an allowance provided for in the long-term plan in terms of transitioning to buses. It's in the, I think, probably from year 4 onwards. What's proposed in terms of the scoping plan is to work through those issues. So it does give you an idea of if you transition over time, what the implications of that might be, because as you've heard today, it's just not as simple as we'll swap that bus for that bus. And you will have other technologies, you know, for example, hydrogen will be there as well in terms of perhaps some other things.
Okay.
In terms of roading infrastructure, I mean, you'd look at, okay, is there another way the bus can go rather than doing that? I mean, if that's an issue for air buses, it's an issue for longer, heavier trucks too, and that's why that's been highlighted. You know, DCC already knew about those bridges because of that HPMV stuff.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Laws, and then Councillor Malcolm.
Yes, I'm perhaps not as excited because I did expect the bus to go. The technology is not new. So the next thing is, so the thing that came out for me was the anecdotal, I think you said it was anecdotal evidence that you require 30% more electricity buses than you need diesel buses. Is that correct?
1 to 3.
So that's talking about the increased PVR, and that would be that's an approximate. I don't know, Russell, if you'd like to talk a little bit more about how that comes about.
Yeah. There's 2 ways that people often use that number. One of them is around the additional price for the vehicle, but the other was basically just specifying how you run your network. And if a bus is required from, say, 5 a.m. in the morning to midnight, that bus may require to come in and be charged sometime during the day and then put back on the road. So that's why you might need 1.3 electric vehicles per normal diesel, because a diesel can normally stay out there all day. But it's very approximate, and it really comes down to the design of the network and the timetable. And I don't believe that in this instance that 1.3 probably applies. I think we could be smarter than that.
Well, that raises my next question. You see, it's all a bit moot for someone like me who comes from Dunstan, that the buses are in relatively small confined urban areas, a really small one in Queenstown and Dunedin. We're talking about a regional transport network. I'm sort of interested in whether or not these electric buses can do what they needed to do in the rather more considerable expanse of South and Central Otago.
Yeah, I guess if you wanted, I could talk a little bit about the bus itself, I suppose, and what its capabilities are. So, as we know, that vehicle is good for about the 300 to 400 sort of K range. So it is good for most sort of urban circuits in New Zealand that we're aware of for an average day's operation. There is the technology, as mentioned before, which is the hydrogen fuel, which we also offer hydrogen fueled vehicles as well as electric. So they are still zero emission, but just run on a hydrogen fuel cell. They can have increased range, so they can go up into the 400 to 500 K range. And then they can also have the ability that they can be refueled in like 15 minutes, like a conventional diesel. So then therefore they don't need to be taken off and recharged. They could be driven for 12 hours, then top back up and then sent out for another 6 or 8 hours or whatever's required. So there are technologies available in the zero emission field that will cover all aspects of transport.
Now you're talking. Have you got hydrogen buses operating in New Zealand?
Yes, yeah, we've developed and built New Zealand's only hydrogen bus at the moment. So that's operating through Auckland Transport in Auckland, doing trials over the next 2 years. So it's proven also extremely successful.
And the cost structure compared to electric vehicles or buses?
Yeah, the cost structure is very expensive for the fuel cell technology at the moment, but I estimate within the next year that will dramatically reduce. And we're in talks with suppliers to actually get them not far being off par with electric vehicles.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's actually Councillor Noon. I'm very sorry. You've been patiently waiting.
That's a minor question, and it's for Mike as well. And I'm just trying to ascertain whether your battery life and how that compares with all the other componentry within the bus. So how does that line up, if it does line up?
Yeah, so the rest of the drivetrain, obviously, an urban bus, New Zealand is good for about 15 years. So at about the 10-year point, they get a refurb, an actual refurb throughout. So that kind of aligns with when the batteries need to be replaced, but the rest of the running gear and stuff is designed for the life of the vehicle. The battery technology is increasing, day on day with the demand, so it won't be much longer before that batteries will be there for the life of the vehicle.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Noon, appreciate that. And we're Councillor Malcolm.
Yeah, thanks. So looking at the cost saving on fuel and the increased cost of the bus, so we probably should hopefully, and still make Go Bus some profit, we should have a net result that the diesel service should cost us forgetting inflation, of course, that we should have a net result for cost of service. So my question probably is to Mr. Maloney, when you're talking about costing this into our structure, my real concern, I suppose, is around when we have to go from 2025 on and 2035, will be the implication that service will have to the targeted ratepayer only, won't it be? It will be to targeted ratepayers, and how soon we can deliver that message to the territorial authority that has the levers to pull to encourage more people to use that service to make it pay, and how soon would that come out? Because that will be the key to making our bus service pay for, or you'll be affordable, I suppose.
Through you, Madam Chair, the bus service will never pay for itself. There will always be a cost because as you get more people on, you will get more demand for service. The scoping exercise that we're asking to prepare will give us an idea of timing, but being completely non-environmentally friendly, you could have diesel buses running right up to 2034. For example, if I was a canny operator and forgot about that stuff, I'd buy a fleet of them before 2025 and they'll last through to 2035. So, you've got 10 years to transition to that point where whether you're an urban provider, you're a commercial long distance provider, you can't have diesels from 2035. So that will impact the likes of intercity, it'll impact school bus services, it's all buses.
So a service, if you get the right balance of use, the service actually should be able to make a profit, shouldn't it?
No, there's nowhere in the world where it's running at a profit.
Except
Solomon's dreaming.
Like a swimming pool.
Hey?
They never pay for themselves either.
Yeah, it's Councillor
That's cool.
Forbes. You quite happy?
I'm just,
I just wanted to
utopia or something.
challenge they'll never pay for themselves. They'll never pay for themselves within our current cost modelling, don't you think, Gary? I mean, the minute we start calculating in full cost accounting with the cost of how many people or how much carbon is being saved by people who are riding that, then that changes the equation. But certainly in the way that we cost things out right now, that will never do that. But actually what I wanted to comment on was the marvellousness of the survey results. And the fact that actually there's an opportunity here that we may be able to find something that these look to be a lot more acceptable as something. It looks like we've done something quite fab with electric buses, and it's just sort of tweaked a lot of people to go, yes, they have been actively trying to travel on it, they have really liked it, and some of them it was quite a big percentage, I can't remember what it was, that felt that it did impact their decision to use a bus. So well done.
Very good. And I have Councillor Deaker. Now, Councillor Deaker, you are up here in the clouds, but you are a bus user here in Dunedin. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Carmen. My question is to Mike at GBV. There was a bit of talk earlier on about medium to smaller sized buses. And I wonder whether, in fact, at Wollaston, whether they are making smaller electric vehicles, and how does their price compare with full-size buses?
Yeah, so we can cover the full range of vehicles from about a 12-seat oversized van, almost size bus, right up to the big 3-axle, 43, 45-seat vehicles. So the full range is available in that electrical platform. The price reduction for the smaller vehicles is not as dramatic as what people would like in some areas. Obviously, the cost of batteries and the drive system is quite a high proportion compared against the actual total vehicle costs. So yeah, you do need to balance up as to where you're trying to save those funds for the amount of seats, cost per seats you're trying to achieve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dacre. Well, it looks like this draws to a close. And I thank you two gentlemen there on Zoom for a thorough discussion this morning. Excuse me, I seen a little frog in my throat. And I thank the team here also in front of me. Speaking of frogs, no offence, but it seems like we got a green Kermit bus and we turned it into a lovely orange carriage, electric carriage that's come down from you, and we really appreciate that. Thank you. I love the fact it is made here in New Zealand. It is such a big deal, especially with what's coming around the corner with COVID. We just don't know what's going to happen. The world's in a little bit of a funny place at the moment. So nice to see that we have a bus made here in New Zealand. If we could just get those batteries made in New Zealand, we'd be ticking along. But we're doing great work and we appreciate all your help this morning and getting us to this part in electric world. Thank you also to the team here. Now we have got staff recommendations. We've got 4. We note this report. We note that trials were successful, providing a range of valuable data about operation performance of electric vehicle in Dunedin. We note that the trial is representative of contracts operated by Go Bus Transport. And number 4, we endorse council staff preparing a subsequent report for council consideration 2020 on the scope to prepare a transition plan to a zero emission public transport fleet. May I have somebody to
Right, just a question
Yes,
first. A question.
okay. You're gonna move it?
Number 4, is that budgeted in, is it already budgeted to be done?
So through you, Madam Chair, it's not the actual scope, it's around testing with you what you want to be in that scope, and then we'll go ahead and prepare that following that. So, it may be mid-year before we come back to you in terms of testing. This is what we think the scope should cover. Is that what you want it to cover?
So just further to that, there's no budget for it. There's no budget for a transition plan and long-term plan. What we're proposing here is just to scope up what a transition plan might include, because there's different ways of slicing it. It could be our transition plan, but this is a systems issue, so it should really be a transition plan for, involving partners. For example, should a transition plan think about funding, for example? So what's in scope, what's out of scope? And once we know the size of what a transition plan might cover, we can then price that up, and then you can make some decisions about timing of the transition plan itself and funding of it.
And so that will be covered under existing budgets, that bit of work that you're trying to get to that stage to.
Yeah, the scoping is really sort of an extension of this trial, if you like, the kind of issues that you've talked about today, and staff have got ideas. So we bring a paper back. That's the scoping.
Good. Quite happy to move all forward.
Thank you. Now I've got Councillor Calvert and Councillor Wilson. Councillor Calvert.
I'm happy to second that, except that
you.
I do think that number 4 should have a time frame in it.
Okay.
And if it's by the middle of the year, then
What was planned by staff, I suppose, is a question.
well, they just suggested by the middle of the year. So I'm thinking whatever the implementation committee meeting is in June or
June, July,
whenever
Dr.
it is.
Palmer, maybe we could put that in there.
We'd envisage by the 30th of June, because it'll
Okay.
feed into next annual plan timing. So
Could we actually put it to that implementation committee, because otherwise they don't sort of quite match. If we had a committee meeting 2 days before
Second
that.
quarter?
Yes.
So that, or fourth quarter, isn't it?
No.
You want to just go 30th?
When is the implement?
Okay. Yes.
Where is the implementation committee meeting in the middle of the year?
Okay.
Can you access that?
June. Might be able to. Councillor Robertson. You're thinking June, end of June? Yeah. Yeah. Why don't we just, can we just
hold
do
on,
that?
that says 23. That one should be 22.
Sorry,
Sorry.
I've got 2 different resolutions, so it looks like the resolution in my system has been changed since the agenda. and I
That's
just
all
need to
right.
be clear which-
Okay, that's why I read it out.
You got timetable.
And I've got a different one too.
So what went out in the agenda?
Yes. The
says
date's
endorses
different.
Council staff preparing a subsequent report for council consideration in
2022, yes, I've got
on the
that
scope
too.
to prepare a transition plan to a zero emission public transport fleet.
Yes.
Now what's in the system has changed from what's gone out to you, good councillors.
Okay.
And I.
That was an earlier version, sorry.
Need to
Yeah,
tweak
it
it.
must have been changed after the agenda went out. So,
Yes.
I
No.
think The one that I'm showing on the screen is the
wrong.
new one. Is that correct?
That's
That's the previous one.
That's the previous.
So I've got council staff preparing a subsequent report for council consideration in 2022. So we're going to say consideration by June 30, 2022.
What date have we? We're just looking for what date it is.
That says 2023.
Yeah.
So-
Yep.
So
We'll just change
it
it to
should say
2022.
2022, but also we're just looking at the meeting agenda for what colours implementation.
So here we go,
Last
9th of
implementation
March.
committee is in March.
Yep,
and then
sorry.
June.
9th
Oh,
of
March,
March.
June, yes, June.
Right,
And what's the
implementation.
next one? Oh,
One
good,
more
so
after
that'd be
that.
by
Because it's the middle.
June
That's
30th.
it. Too early.
Madam Chair, if we just said no to
8th of
implementation,
June.
to implementation committee no
Yeah.
later than 30th of June, then that would
Correct.
capture
Well,
and give us some flexibility if the
Could we
meeting.
have the 8th of June, because that's when there's an implementation committee?
You want to specifically put the 8th of June, Councillor
Well,
Calvert?
to go to a committee meeting is
Okay.
good, rather than having a date that is in between committee meetings,
All right.
because
Yeah.
otherwise it will disappear off for another whole cycle.
Okay.
It could.
So let's put the 8th of June, knowing that if that
Okay.
causes difficulty in there most of the way
Yes.
through it, but they haven't quite got it, we'll
Yep,
hear back.
That's okay. All righty.
So it's now number 4.
Let's read it. It's me.
Yeah.
Endorses, let me read it. Endorses council staff developing a plan to go to the implementation committee no later 8th of June 2022 for transition to a zero emission fleet, and notes that this initiative is not budgeted in the long-term plan.
I thought this
Sorry,
was a
Madam
scope
Chair.
for a, scope for a implementation plan.
Okay. Because there's different. I've got it too. I've got this. Yes, excuse me, we'll just,
About that,
Here we
developing
go.
a scope for a plan.
That's what.
that's
I
what we
know
had.
that's saying that that's changed.
Yeah.
So they've changed it in the system.
Yes.
No, but
Post this going out.
Yeah, but that's the one, that's an old, that's the one they want. That's the one we want.
But we need a date in it, correct?
Yes,
Yeah, we need
correct.
a date.
So look at it now,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's what I've just. Yeah.
Then
Subsequent
we've got a-
report.
We don't need to do that one on the fly, just because we choose plan.
So,
I love it.
so what, it's just changed from a subsequent report to a developing scope for a plan. That's the
Scope
that's
to
the different
prepare a
wordings.
transition.
Yeah.
It should be scope to prepare a transition rather than for transition, I think. Is it?
Okay, let's reword that, please.
Developing scope to prepare.
A transition plan.
Yeah.
We just read it the way we've got it in our papers, which is which endorses council staff preparing a subsequent report for council consideration in 2022 on the scope to prepare a transition plan to a zero emission public transport fleet. Now you can add,
That is,
I understand that, and
No, but that's what we're changing.
that's what we've got,
Let's just do that.
with the addition of councillor Calvert's to do with committee and timing.
That's perfect.
That's, yep, do you have the previous
So-
one?
I think there's a fundamental issue here
Yes.
that we've had a paper change.
Yes.
I actually don't know what that change was and whether it was a whole paper or just a recommendation now. And that is actually quite important because we're voting on something and when we update things, we don't see what changes. So I read a report last week that may now have changed. That is an actual issue. Can we have some
We may
clarity
be able
about
to have
that?
Some clarification on that. Am I correct, Dr. Palmer? It's just the recommendation, the report's the same?
I think that's really hard on Liz
Liz,
in this instance, but I actually now don't know what else changed.
We'll need to have a look at that.
We'll need to have a look at
We
that.
can't answer that on the
Yeah.
spot. I'm sorry.
Here we go. Let's have a look.
Yeah. That's what.
All righty.
yes.
Okay.
Okay, I do have another question.
Councillor Wilson?
I'm really happy with this resolution and I would look forward to the answer to that other question. There are two issues obviously of infrastructure, one being bridges and one being charging sites. We have Aurora doing development work constantly in Dunedin and we also have council doing upgrades to things well outside but that are major. And I'm delighted, thank you, Chair, for sending through that email that you've just sent saying that the council, DCC, want to work with us with this. I hope as part of this that we are future-proofing that sort of Aurora work and bridge work, that should they come up for review, that we put that, we just let them know that those are things that we want to have some input or are concerned about. What and how would we be doing messaging that in the interim with the DCC? Do they know of these things?
So through you, Madam Chair, the DCC was aware of the report. They were aware of the stuff around bridge weight issues that were flagged in the report. In terms of the electricity net, you know, historically, the issue has been one for operators wanting to transition to work through that. There hasn't been a regional council role in that. The transitional plan, sorry, the scoping report that we will bring back to you will tease out those things around where our role starts and stops. You know, it could be, for example, hey, what's your appetite to buy the charging infrastructure and provide that and lease it to the companies? And then, of course, you'd have to get into that conversation with the electricity supply.
Okay, thank you. That's good. It's going to be in the report.
All righty. Good to note too. You've moved it. And
Thanks for
we
the
have a
adjustment,
seconder. Was that
Liz.
Councillor Calvo? Thank you, Ms. Spector. Good to see you, Mrs. Gardner, on the bus at the museum. Great. Great to
Yeah,
have
no,
it. Did you
I
enjoy
went,
it?
I went for a
You went
whole
for a
loop.
loop? Good.
Yeah, no, it was great.
Quiet? Yep.
Fantastic.
Really good.
Very quiet.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you managed to tag on and tag off?
Absolutely.
Top girl.
Very
Okay.
good.
Let's put these four to everybody. We have the four. All those in favour, please say aye. Anyone against? Carried. Thank you very much, transportation team, for 7.2. Thank you very much, you two, for a very in-depth discussion this morning on the buses. We really appreciate it. And thank you for giving up your time. Thank you. There you go. They're away. Yep. They are. They're away. It's good. They're off. Thank you, Russell. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Abby.
Here we go. Thank you, Abby. And we have Miss Howard back and we have Dr. Palmer. This is 7.3, the item that was public excluded, now to be held in public. And our paper brief here is the decision on future of rabbit control assets. Okay. So, I guess we start at the start. This purpose receipts a final decision on the future of ORC owned rabbit control assets. The executive summary, which is very short and sweet. The paper recommends the sale and disposal of the council's remaining rabbit control assets to support the private sector to undertake rabbit control. There are recommendations. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 noting and 2 approves. And I am going to be now in your hands, Ms. Howard and Dr. Palmer, to talk about the paper in front of us, please.
Through the chair, I'm assuming people have read it, so happy to take any questions.
I have a couple for you, and as you all know, I'm not terrific at maths, but I'm wondering in here, have I missed something? Is there some valuation, depreciation costs that I can't see, or I am looking in the wrong place, please?
Through the chair, no, there are no costs about the value of the assets in the paper.
Is there a reason why? I mean, I'm just thinking to myself, if you're going to sell something, usually you want to know how much it might be going for or how much it's going to cost and some depreciation. Is there a reason? Please, I'm just trying to figure it out.
Through the
here we go, Mr. Donnelly, please.
We could go away and provide that, but these are very old assets.
Yeah.
I think you'll find that the book they'll be fully depreciated. They'll have no book value. So that's probably why we haven't dug that information out. We have a few years ago we did sell. I think we sold 2.
Yeah.
But so it's not like we did get value for them. I'd have to go away and have a look at what we got. We sold them in the open market, but cost wise, yeah, we're talking about 50-year-old assets in a lot of cases. So our actual book value will be 0.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Councillor Calvert.
I haven't got a question. I would like to move the recommendations with the exception of disposing of the items that Councillor Kelleher is about to describe. And he might want to second my motion and tell you what those assets that he considers we should retain are.
Thank you, Councillor Calvert. So just make it clear, you'll move from 1 to 5 and then 7 as well. Am I correct?
And 6 was the alteration that Councillor Keller was about to explain.
Okay, so you're moving that. Do I have a seconder? Anyone going to second this? Okay, all right. My apologies. I thought just the way it was. Councillor Kelleher, you're going to talk, obviously.
Yes.
Okay,
well,
I apologise.
I would second that motion because if the motion as it stood was going to be moved, I was going to move an alternative motion. I have real concerns around the Galloway site because of its uniqueness. There is an obvious position with the staff that this equipment is not going to be used in any way by, say, either staff or rented or leased or made available. And even though the community has resoundingly said they want it retained, I guess my real fear is that if it's sold, it'll be lost outside of Otago, and we need it in Otago. They are Otago assets. But then we have the stalemate of a situation where contractors have asked for use of this equipment. It's sat in a shed, or in worst case, I see it's actually sitting outside in Wanaka at the moment, and it hasn't been made available. So to me, that's even worse than the current situation. So I agree that reluctantly that if it's not going to be available owned by ORC, it may as well be available and sold. But I think there is a very sensible recommendation in the comments from the contractors, the longest one that's there, about the Galloway site. And I totally agree with it, because the Galloway site is a very unique setup, and it was set up specifically for oat cooking. And Otago is incredibly lucky to have that. So what I would be hopeful of is that the recommendation that is made by whoever that was, I don't know who it was, around ORC retaining Galloway and finding a means to have it available to one or other contractors would be the best outcome. And it is, well, that individual is also recommending 1 or 2 items of plant be retained. So my suggestion would be that we agree to sell the rest of it, but retain that equipment. To rebuild Galloway now, I don't know that we'd even get the steel available in New Zealand. If you ever currently try to build or do anything, getting that even equipment available. So given we have such an issue with rabbits at the moment, they are escalating, we have such a change in how we are operating, I think it's such a critical piece of equipment that wouldn't be replicated by anybody else, that we should be looking to retain it in the short term and look at how we might utilise it.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Kelleher, Mrs. Gardner has asked to speak. So, Mrs. Gardner.
So just on Galloway, in my very first council meeting ever, there was a request to cook oats at Galloway because we were in a drought in the summer of 2018. And I think we even purchased about 8 tonnes worth of oats, and went to the trouble of organising ourselves to do that. And we could not deliver those oats at a competitive price in the market. As far as I can recall, we did not end up supplying oats despite the request. That's the best recollection I have, unless Dr. Palmer has a different one.
Emily was quite involved in that.
Yes. So, to the best of my knowledge, we never sold any oats because we couldn't offer them at a competitive price. And we've had 8 tonnes of oats that have hung around.
Okay, now Councillor Keller's asked to think, and then Councillor Scott.
I think I do recall, I don't think I was a councillor then, I do recall that situation because there were complaints to me about that entire situation. I'm not suggesting that we look to cook oats. I'm suggesting we look to have the equipment available on an as-is available basis for contractors to undertake it themselves, or one contractor. We look to lease it, and they go in with their eyes wide open as to what they could do with it.
Want to respond?
The only thing I would say is I think the paper makes note of health and safety issues back in 2018. we had to undertake a risk assessment before we made the decision to cook the oats, and we took on some risk with that assessment without undertaking some upgrading to the facilities. As far as I'm aware, we would still have current health and safety issues, and as the PCBU for Otago Regional Council, I would need to be satisfied that we weren't taking on risk or liability that we couldn't manage in that circumstance, which I think is what the paper talks about.
Thank you.
Question.
Just a minute. Can I just have Councillor Wilson? Sorry, Councillor
Sure,
Wilson.
that's fine.
She's just gone there. Oh, and we've Councillor. No, I apologise. It's actually Councillor Scott. My apologies. Sorry, man in the orange shirt.
Cool. Look, Councillor Callagher knows more about these assets. The other way there. If he stalemate, staff don't really want the responsibility for various reasons, health and safety, whatever, financial, to be involved with these assets. I haven't actually seen these assets, but I understand that Gary, we need carrot, we need oats, all this type of thing. Surely there's a contractor out there that actually has their heart in it, that can do the job better than us. What the report says is that 2/3 of all the respondents to the survey said they would be likely to purchase carrot cutting assets if they're able to purchase. You know, I think in the report it identifies 2 contractors. Surely, you know, do we really, you know, like, because we're not doing this well. We're in a stalemate, you know, and surely it's time to just go to another stage. We've had some success, I think, earlier today in terms of our approach regards rabbits, and I don't think it's really involved the assets. So I'm not trying to say, because Gary, you would have seen these assets and you've spoken to the contractors, but surely there's, you know, that in terms of the whole process, that we need to go to another stage, because it just doesn't seem to be working. Ideally, there's a contractor there that can take this as an opportunity. There's a hell of a lot of rabbits out there. Surely there's some money in it. So it's actually, it's almost a plea. You know, surely we can move out of this stalemate. That's a question. Can I take that back to Councillor Keller?
Yes, would you mind, Councillor Wilson, if we... Thank you. Councillor Keller.
Oats and carrots are different. Carrots are easy. You buy them, you chop them up, you lace them, and you spread them. Oats are treated very differently, and they need that specific equipment, and we're lucky enough to have it. What's recommended here is that it just says sell everything. But my understanding is we own that site. So it's land and the equipment that sits over the top of it. And what I think hasn't been explored is there a contractor who would just, if we even said we're only going to own the land, all of that equipment is available for you to lease and retain. You then, it may sit unused for 2 or 3 years and then suddenly be used. Who knows whether rabbit's going to keep escalating or whether we actually are going to see great success with the current plan. Either way is a unique set of specific equipment that wouldn't be re-established again, in my view. And no contractor, I think, could be reasonably expected to set that up again, so they won't. And I think if we lose the ability to cook oats, we won't get it back again.
Okay, so you basically agree with them for excluding your like to lease out the oat.
I think the oat facility in Galloway is so unique that we should be retaining it until we can find a means for someone else to use it, because we obviously aren't going to use it ourselves. So I'm not saying we should be having anything to do with cooking oats ourselves, but retain it so that at least somebody else can, because if that's sold, I suspect it'll be cut up for scrap, the steel will go and the site will get a house built on it.
Okay, well, through Madam Chair,
yes,
can I ask staff for their reply to that whether it's national, financial, or governmental, and
Yes. Certainly, co-chair. Well, Mr. Donnelly or Dr. Palmer or Ms. Howard?
Through the chair, I'll just say one thing. I do understand there is one other oat cooking. I just can't remember the contractor, but in the last 2 months, I've been made aware of another contractor in Otago that does have oat cooking facilities. It's either Manitoto Pest Company or Highland Contracting. I just can't remember, but just for context, it's my understanding there is another outfit. It'll be different to what ORC currently
But
holds.
basically, to sell everything but the Galloway site and actually go through an advertisement to lease the oat cook arrangement.
Righty.
Is that an option?
Right, Mrs. Gardner just wants to talk.
No, I just think if Dr. Palmer could or Ms. Howard could explain, I think there's a budget implication here. If you retain the Galloway site, you're obviously going to want to invest to upgrade it and make it suitable for use. And so there will be a cost to that. So I'm just wondering if Dr. Palmer could speak to that further, or Ms. Howard.
Can I help with that? Because I think what Brian was talking about was exactly where I was going to go, and that's suggesting that you lease the site out, but you sell the equipment to preferably can look at the option of selling it to a mixture of a combined consortium of people working in that field so that they all can have access to it. What I don't actually want to do is sell it off to one person who then has the monopoly potentially of that market. There are ways of working, and we could be directing that they run the equipment, they have to upgrade it or whatever, but we lease the site to them on long term on that basis, that it is a consortium that works together, and they've got access to that when we have dry years, which won't be this year, I think, and the oats are needed.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Palmer or Ms. Howard, would you like to comment, please?
Through the chair, I guess the only thing I can say, two things. One, I've never been approached by any contractor who wishes to purchase it from us. So we've got to, I guess, ascertain whether there's demand or even to use it. And then the second thing I'll point out is on page 48, where we engaged an expert mechanical engineer from Christchurch who said there are at least 11 areas. So it's not impossible, but it will come at it's by no means state of the art and requires a number of enhancements for it to be functional. We haven't costed those out. I have had some difficulty, and we have contacted about 7 engineering firms in the region around a cost of repurposing some of the equipment. And as I've alluded to in the report, there's either no interest or a little bit of reluctance due to the health and safety obligations of repurposing equipment that may not be fit for purpose. So it's possible, but unlike the carrot cutting assets, in the 2 years that I've been here, nobody's ever approached asking to lease it or buy it, except for an adjacent landowner who has contacted me this morning wanting to know what's happening.
Thanks, Ms. Howard. Councillor Calvert, you had your hand up.
Yeah. I find it a wee bit difficult to get to the bottom of this, apart from I understand what Gary's suggesting. In the no significant financial considerations, I've got no idea how much any of the stuff is worth, and it includes depot land and related buildings somewhere, and we're just sort of throwing that out with the bathwater as if it's useless carrot cutting equipment or something. I'd like a bit more information if we were intending to go ahead and sell something that involves land and related buildings in any case. So in that sense, if we took that whatever it is, equipment and that depot and building out of the equation at present, it wouldn't prevent staff coming back to us at a later date and explaining what it might be worth at some level, or what it is we might be and like 2 years later we might find that there's nobody who's ever going to do anything with it, and while Gary had been hopeful, it just turns out to not be useful at all. But it would take out depot land and buildings and things part of it too in the meantime, which we haven't got anything like enough information to give us an idea about, apart from saying it's got sort of minimal financial implications, which isn't usually enough for us to make decisions on. So I support Gary's suggestion for both those reasons.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Laws.
I guess I've been around long enough to know that two things. Once something's gone, it's gone.
Yep.
And that often in the sale of things, we forget about the larger public good and the reduction in options that brings. I'd be very reluctant to get rid of an asset that has still got the ability to help us actively, in this particular case, combat the #1 pest in our Otago region. And I do understand that there is probably going to need to be some sort of upgrade, in particular of the oat cooker in some capacity to bring it up to the standard that might be desired or expected. And I also say this is one of those papers that would have benefited going through the lens of governance before it got here today, and I'll say why. Because some of these questions would have been asked during that process, #1. And #2, one of the things that I would have been looking for, and certainly Hilary is looking for as well, is some of the costings. How much would you sell it for? What would be the alternative supply? All those sorts of things. Now, there's two ways that we can handle this going forward, it seems to me. We can get into a combative situation where Councillor Kelleher will put his motion and say, well, excluding this, which then has, as I understand, a resource implication for you, Andrea, in the sense that you are now going to have to go away and say, right, well, we're going to have to hold it, but we're going to have to upgrade it. We're going to have to put some money into making sure that it's going to do the job that it's meant to do. Or it seems to me that we can come back to this decision at some time when we have a better understanding of how it goes. But again, I just want to say we don't kill rabbits anymore. We've got a policy that I've always said to you is a complete failure and will always fail. I've said that from the time I've been sitting here. And unfortunately, the rabbits have proliferated even more since I've been elected. They do. That's what they do. And so I'm going, yeah, so the smallest contribution that we could make to assisting contractors to kill rabbits, we're now going to move away from when it's tiny and infinitesimal. I also hear health and safety concerns being raised here. It's the first time. What are those health and safety concerns? No. You can't just say health and safety concerns. That's a catch-all, meaningless phrase to me. Tell me, what are they? Is anybody going to die? They're going to lose a finger? Does it mean that, they might be psychologically damaged? I don't know, because it's such a catch-all crap phrase. So I want to know more detail on those sorts of things before an assessment here. Now, you can do two things, it seems to me. You can actually detail and answer some of those questions and let this lie on the table until the next implementation committee, or you can move towards the process we're going to move, which is dividing this council table yet again. Just putting those thoughts out there.
Now, Councillor Laws, Mrs. Gardner wants to comment, please.
I was just going to offer a suggestion for the resolution.
Yeah, sure.
Because, sorry, have you inserted it?
Some of these will need to be moved, won't they?
It's just that what isn't clear. So it talks about retaining, which is fine, but retaining could mean just that. Yeah. Or it could mean retaining and upgrading and making fit for purpose. And so that's right. So it needs some clarification as to what it is.
The exception
of. Well, the exception of, yeah, that's right. But what I'm saying is, okay, so yes, but what I'm trying to explain is that retain as it is in the state that it is now, where we are doing nothing, effectively nothing, just letting it sit there, or are you wanting it retained in a different state to the state it is now? And if you do, then you should put that in the resolution.
I agree.
Okay.
It doesn't, I think if it says to dispose of the remaining ones, with the exception of that, it is silent on what happens with that. And over a period, that'll come back to our table, or if it isn't being used for anything at all, or whatever. It doesn't say anybody has to maintain it. It wasn't being maintained in the first place. So all that's happening is the same thing as happening as yesterday, namely nothing. So
No,
I don't think it demands.
Can I listen? I'm trying to move us along. I think the chief executive has a really good point. Fine, everybody's now saying, it seems, with some degree of unanimity, get rid of all the carrot cutters and things like that. That can be done. It's relatively easy. And that's what I've been told by the contractors as well. They do all say to me the same thing about the oak processing, Andrew. But if we just leave it the way it is, I don't think that's going to make things better. It's just going to simply fall away. And what Sarah's saying is, for God's sake, indicate that if you are going to keep it, you're actually going to upgrade it. There'll be a cost implication to that, a resource implication. Yes, it does. It does need to be upgraded. It does.
Well,
I mean, that's the evidence, isn't it?
Through the chair, I would expect that we would try and first work out if anybody wanted the products that it would produce if we upgraded it. That would probably be sensible in the first instance, and then we would upgrade it. And as shown in that survey, half the people said they would like to us to retain it, and only half of those people said they would purchase it from us.
And in regards to the health and safety matter, there was a report in about 2017.
I remember that.
No, there was.
No, I'm not. So I'm just saying it's 4 years ago. It's sort of like what did it say?
There were several items on that report in terms of upgrade that needed to happen. At least 10.
Can I just make a comment? In terms of health and safety, I mean, the plant was built before the bloody Act even came into power. I mean, it's quite a, you'll know, Gary, it's a relatively ancient oak dryer, oak cocker / dryer. There's lots of belts and steps that have no barriers or protection and all that sort of thing. I think that's where the main
interpoppers and things like that.
I drive a car like that.
Report back. Leave that out like it is there, with the exception of that, and ask for a report back on what we should. I mean, that depot might be useful for us for some other reason, or we might know how much it is or isn't worth or whatever. So separately, get some sort of an idea about a way forward. And in the meantime, Councillor Keller can have a look into and see whether there's a realistic thing to do, and have separately that dealt with, because we haven't got enough information to deal with that asset at this point now anyway. It might be that we want to use it for something else, the depot. Who knows but we wouldn't usually dispose of something just with it's got a piece of equipment and nobody might be using. Let's get rid of land and buildings without any idea of even how much they're worth. So I think it's a separate thing. So let's leave it out now. And if we want to think about what we're going to do with it, add something in there saying, let's have a report about that item. Well, those two items, because there's the land and building and depot thing, and there's the equipment in there.
Just
hold that separately.
Hold that there, Councillor Scott. You're okay with just her dictation while Councillor Scott, and then it's Councillor Malcolm.
Yeah, look, I think, believe it or not, I think we are making some progress.
Yes, we are. We haven't gone round and round. Yep.
And the only question mark is the Galloway site.
Yes. Yep. Yes.
And
let's just get that tweaked.
Personally,
yeah.
I would set up a small little working party group to work with staff, and that party would include Councillor Callaghan. And so we just, once and for all, we actually put this issue to bed.
Yes. All right. Now, Councillor Malcolm, go to you, and then we'll read it. Yeah, you want to do?
I've suggested a working group.
Okay.
It might be just Councillor Callaghan. It might be either you or I as
yes.
That might be a working
I see.
And then, so we can actually cut to the chase. Possibly.
Do you, Councillor Scott, do you want to put it underneath? We've got 6 and 7 here. I'm looking what Ms. Spector's got up on the board, Ms. Ford. So do you want to put another note underneath it to say?
Anything to get us.
Well, if we get the progress, so.
Between 6 and 7.
Yep, between 6 and 7, we need something. Sorry, Liz.
That's where she had been putting it.
Yeah. Oh, Ms. Howard?
Through the chair, would
Yes.
it be a working party to look at what we might do with land in Central Otago, or a working party to look at what we might do with the oat cooker?
It's just a Galloway depot.
Just a
Galloway
Galloway.
depot and oat processing equipment.
Yep. There you go. We've just said it. Working party to look at the oat cooker, depot and plant at Galloway.
You're
To
volunteering?
report back to the next
Yep.
implementation committee.
Please, please, can we, I mean, this has been sitting around forever and ever. I'm not going to prioritise this over some of the other priorities that we have. I think that's unreasonable. So my suggestion would be that we come back before the end of the financial year.
Okay,
Yes.
that's great. Thank you. Look, we've got a resident councillor. Sorry, just a minute. We'll go to Dr. Palmer.
You've just got an assurance from the
Yeah.
Chief Executive, so you can just
Yes.
pass all those recommendations.
Yes, and we can get on with it. Dr. Palmer.
Just clarity around the expectation of the working party. I
Yes.
imagine that they could come up with a range of options.
Yes.
Sell, lease,
Yes.
whatever.
Yep.
But they would need to be informed. We're starting to get into costings and how arrangements work.
Yep.
And there's a
Yes.
expert input and there's a cost involved in that. So I just want to get clarity around the
Okay.
expectation of what is actually reported back.
Well,
We're gonna lose.
Councillor Scott.
Working party. I'm not talking about a couple, 2 or 3 countries going off beyond.
No, not really.
I'm talking about working constructively with staff to come up with a.
You didn't say 7.
I said report back.
You didn't say creative work.
So working together with staff.
Huh?
Yeah.
Staff won't have all the expertise that we'll need. Staff won't have all the expertise.
So
needed.
can I just cut this to the chase? Why don't you merge 6 and 7, comma after equipment,
And then create.
and then it just says, and report back. So forget the creative working party.
Yep.
Before the end of the financial year on options for the Galloway depot and oat processing equipment.
You happy with that, Councillor Scott? 'Cause it's-
Well,
Why do you need councillors involved? The only councillor, I'm pretty sure that Andrea and Gavin would go and talk to Gary and they'd say, wouldn't you?
Would you be happy?
Of course.
Exactly.
There we are.
There you
So,
go.
Let's get on with it.
That's
Come
all that
on,
we
we're
need.
all hungry.
Right.
You're eating my thingies because you're all hungry. Come on.
and I would anticipate that it would talk about financial effects and things
Yes,
too,
yes,
not
yes,
just.
yes. And that's what the options will be when it comes back.
Councillor
We've
Malcolm.
understood your
Yeah,
concern.
Councillor Malcolm, you have
After the oat processing equipment,
not out with that finger.
to include a report on the value of the property, buildings and equipment.
Well, it should be including,
Yeah.
including on the value.
Because I've got no idea.
Just
I don't know
including
how,
on the
there's
value.
nothing to tell me how big the piece of land is.
Yeah.
What I'm selling.
Yeah, so you don't need the report. Just including the value of the property, buildings and equipment. There you go.
Yeah, that's.
And we now, we have an unwritten understanding, gentleman's agreement that Gary will liaise with Andrea and Gavin.
Well, it's in public, so we've had assurances from our staff on a public meeting.
We've just had an assurance from the chief executive that Gary, and we've had assurance from Gavin, who's the head of general manager. So.
We
fantastic.
understand what
We
you
trust each other. Let's go.
Ms. Victor, you okay? You're,
Everyone's okay with what I've
yep.
got?
Are you happy?
Excellent, Liz.
Councillor Deaker, are you there?
Didn't go.
It's all right. I just want to be fair and make sure everyone's had their say.
Yes, I am, and
Okay,
I'm
dear God.
perfectly happy with the way number 6 reads.
Top man. All righty. Let's put it, shall we? We
moving
have,
it?
we've had.
I moved it and
Councillor.
Councillor
Gary's
Kelleher
seconded.
seconded it.
Rightio. We have got the whole of these, so we're going to do the whole lot at once. Is everyone happy?
Yes.
Okay. Drum roll, please. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Well done.
Look at that.
Thank you for the implementation. Councillor Scott and myself wish you a very festive season, peaceful and